Chapter 141. With Chu Xiu's current status, it was actually very easy for him to join Guanzhong Torture Room. Guanzhong Torture Room would recruit martial artists every year to become constables. With Chu Xiu's strength, there was no reason for Guanzhong Torture Room to reject him if he wanted to join Guanzhong Torture Room. However, Chu Xiu didn't have any foundation. Even if he had the strength of a physical invulnerability expert, he wouldn't be entrusted with such a heavy responsibility. Did he have to start from the bottom to join Guanzhong Torture Room? Guanzhong Torture Room wasn't Blue Dragon Society, where one could gain fame by simply killing people. Chu Xiu couldn't be bothered to waste time scheming at the bottom of Guanzhong Torture Room. Therefore, he was looking for an opportunity to join Guanzhong Torture Room openly and directly take power. Eastern Qi, Zhejiang Prefecture, Lunnan County. This place was closest to Guanzhong. At this moment, on a small path outside Zhejiang Prefecture, Chu Xiu was standing on a big tree, waiting for something. After leaving Wei County, Chu Xiu kept a low profile as he walked along the desolate and uninhabited paths in the mountain forest. It took him 3 months to arrive at Zhejiang Manor, and he waited there for more than a month. If the original plot didn't go wrong because of the butterfly effect, there would be an important person from Guanzhong Torture Room passing by during this time. This person was the key to Chu Xiu's entry into Guanzhong Torture Room. 2 hours later, a battle cry came from the south side of the small path. Chu Xiu hid in the crown of a tree, hiding his aura to the extreme. On the small path, more than 10 fast horses galloped toward him. Among them, there were physical invulnerability experts and inner invulnerability experts. The one in the center had the strength of a physical invulnerability expert, but he was protected in the center. Obviously, his identity wasn't ordinary. The martial artist being protected was wearing a blue brocade robe. He was about 40 years old, had a square and elegant appearance, and had a long sword at his waist. However, he looked a little disheveled at the moment. Behind him, there were dozens of people on fast horses chasing after them. There were also inner and physical invulnerability experts, but their strength was several times that of the people being chased. The leader was a ferocious-looking black-robed martial artist who looked to be in his 50s. He looked at the figures in front of him and shouted in a shrill voice like an owl, "Chu Yuanxing! In the past, your father killed my master. Today, I have found a chance. I will skin you alive and pull out your tendons. I will bring you to my master's tomb as a sacrifice." Chu Yuanxing, who was protected in the middle, snorted coldly when he heard that. "Your master, the 7-slaughter-old ghost, has done many evil deeds. He even abducted hundreds of young men and women to use as human cauldrons to cultivate his evil techniques. Of course, he deserves to be killed. He doesn't need you to hold a memorial for him. I'm afraid he has already been sent to the 18th level of hell to atone for his crimes. Yin Xiangzi, in the past, my father saw that you were young and let you live. I never thought that you would not repent and still want to kill me. When I return to Guanzhong, I will definitely let Hall Leader Guan take action and kill all of you evil cultivators." That Yin Xiangzi sneered and said, "Return to the Guanzhong Torture Room? Chu Yuanxing, I'm afraid you are thinking too much. Today, I have gathered all the evil cultivators of the 9 families and 18 strongholds to come and kill you. How would I give you the chance to return to Guanzhong?" As his voice faded, Yin Xiangzi abruptly slapped his palm towards the horse he was riding on. An evil and sinister palm force poured into the horse, causing the blood in the horse's body to explode and its speed to reach its peak. In an instant, it had already arrived in front of Chu Yuanxing and the others. The blood vessels of the horse he was riding on exploded and it died. "Go and die!" Yin Xiangzi's palm landed. Killing intent gathered in the black earth energy. Countless palm forces with negative emotions landed. Hate to kill, resentment to kill, greed to kill, 7-slaughter demon palm. This Yin Xiangzi's strength was definitely at the top of the physical invulnerability realm. His earth energy palm force exploded for tens of feet. With his strength alone, he blocked Chu Yuanxing and the others. He forced them to get off their horses and fight back while retreating. Chu Xiu stood in the treetop and silently looked at the people below. A glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. The person he was waiting for had arrived. The person Chu Xiu was waiting for was naturally not Yin Xiangzi, but Chu Yuanxing, who was being chased. Accurately speaking, this person should not be considered as a member of the Guanzhong Torture Room. However, his position in the Guanzhong Torture Room was very high. Even the master of the Guanzhong torture room, Guan Siyu, had to give him some face. This was because he was the previous master of the Guanzhong torture room, the son of the great hero Chu Kuanga. In the chaotic world of Jianghu, everyone only cared about themselves. In the Jianghu, most people only sought fame and power. There were actually not many people who could be called heroes. Chu Kuanga was one of them. More accurately speaking, Chu Kuanga was not a hero. His actions had already surpassed the level of a hero. He could be called a great hero. During the period when Chu Kuanga took over the Guanzhong torture room, he eradicated evil and helped the needy. He did all these things that chivalrous people would do. The most praiseworthy thing was that during the war between the northern Yan and eastern Qi, the two sides chose to fight outside a small town. This was a place that both sides would fight for. Once the war started, the entire town had tens of thousands of people and most of them would die in the flames of war. It was Chu Kuanga who rode alone and fought against the two great generals of the northern Yan and eastern Qi. He used his martial arts and suffered heavy injuries in exchange for the people of that town not dying in the flames of war. From then on, the title of Great Hero became Chu Kuanga's nickname. Unfortunately, in this chaotic world of Jianghu, whether good or bad, only the strong would live to the end. Chu Kuanga was a great hero, but unfortunately, he was not strong enough. Over the years, he had saved many people, but he had offended even more people. That was why he died in an accident less than 20 years after taking charge of the Guanzhong torture room. He became the shortest leader of the Guanzhong torture room in the history of the hall. However, although Chu Kuanga was dead, he had also laid a solid foundation for the rise of the Guanzhong torture room led by Guan Siyu. Without Chu Kuanga's chivalry, the Guanzhong torture room would not have left such a great reputation in Jianghu. It was also because of Chu Kuanga's martial arts that he left a deep impression in the hearts of the three countries, the northern Yan, eastern Qi, and west Chu. The current hall master of the Guanzhong torture room, Guan Siyu, was promoted by Chu Kuanga. In the past, when Guan Siyu was young, he was incorruptible, so his nickname was the Iron Judge. He was really merciless. Even when his personal disciple made a mistake, he would cripple his martial arts according to the rules of the Guanzhong torture room. He did not show any mercy. A person with this kind of character was not suitable to be in power. Only Chu Kuanga dared to use him. Before he died, he used his reputation and prestige in the Guanzhong torture room to push Guan Siyu to the position of hall master of the Guanzhong torture room. That was how the glory of the Guanzhong torture room was created. Chu Kuanga was a legend in Jianghu, but his son, the current Chu Yuanxing, did things very much like his father. He was even called the Guanzhong hero. However, in Chu Xiu's opinion, this person's biggest characteristic was that he had no special characteristics and was a very mediocre person. Chu Yuanxing stepped into the physical invulnerability stage in his 40s. This kind of strength was already very good in the eyes of outsiders. However, as Chu Kuanga's son, Chu Yuanxing had been taught by countless experts like Guan Siyu since he was young. These people were all his father's good friends or people who had received favors from his father. He had resources and teachers. In the end, Chu Yuanxing was still a physical invulnerability stage in his middle age. In his early years, he had stepped into the Longhu list, but it was not because of his strength, but purely because of his identity as Chu Kuanga's son. As for ability, Chu Yuanxing was also slightly mediocre. Because he was Chu Kuanga's son, in order to avoid suspicion, Chu Kuanga told everyone in the Guanzhong torture room before he died that his son would not hold any position in the Guanzhong torture room. However, even so, he was still Chu Kuanga's son, so the people in the Guanzhong torture room gave him a lot of face. It could even be said that Chu Yuanxing's status in the Guanzhong torture room was second only to Guan Siyu's. Of course, this was only status and not actual power. Although Chu Yuanxing did not have any real power, with the connections in his hands, as long as he used them well, Chu Yuanxing would definitely become an overlord-level figure. However, it was a pity that Chu Yuanxing did not do so. Instead, he blindly imitated his father and deliberately acted chivalrously. The results were not so good. Small favors were not a problem, but if he encountered something too troublesome, or if the opponent was too strong, he would not involuntarily retreat. He did not have the courage like his father, who dared to face the armies of two countries by himself and use force to fight. Chu Kuanga just wanted to do what he should do in his heart, so he became a great hero of the generation. Chu Yuanxing just wanted to be his father, so his achievements were very limited. He only got the title of Guanzhong Hero. As the name suggested, he was still very popular in Guanzhong. This time, the person Chu Xiao was waiting for was Chu Yuanxing. Joining the Guanzhong torture room himself and being recommended to the Guanzhong torture room by Chu Yuanxing were two completely different concepts. At this time, Chu Yuanxing and the others were in danger, but Chu Xiao still did not make a move. It was not the most dangerous time for Chu Yuanxing and the others. Providing timely help would definitely leave a deeper impression than adding icing on the cake. In the original plot, Chu Yuanxing returned to Guanzhong and was chased by people. It could be said that he suffered a great loss. The people around him were all killed, and only he escaped after being seriously injured. In the end, he angered Guan Siyu, and a large number of Jianghu constables were sent to hunt him down. In the end, he was killed in eastern Qi. Sure enough, although Chu Yuanxing and the others were suppressed by the other party, in the end, Chu Yuanxing and the others took out a sword formation to turn the situation around. Chu Kuanga had countless friends in the past, and many Jianghu people had received favors from him. This sword formation was given to Chu Yuanxing by an expert in Sword King City in the past for self-defense. There was no need to set it up. He could directly take out the sword formation and use his inner force to activate it. Unfortunately, it was a one-time use, and it would be useless after use. With the power of this sword formation, more than 10 people on Yingxiangzi's side were killed in an instant, and it blocked them for a period of time. Chu Yuanxing and the others also took the opportunity to escape. Chapter 142. Chu Yuanxing and the rest escaped. Yin Xiangzi and the rest below also suffered heavy losses. Some of them were covered in dirt. Someone from Yin Xiangzi's side said unhappily, "Yin Xiangzi, what the hell are you doing? You were the one who said you had the confidence to kill Chu Yuanxing. What's going on now? If Chu Yuanxing really returns to Guanzhong alive, who will bear the wrath of the Guanzhong torture room?" Yin Xiangzi snorted. Who knew that Chu Yuanxing would bring so many trump cards with him on this trip? If you had been more decisive and attacked together, would you have let Chu Yuanxing escape? And this time, you've already acted, so don't be half-hearted. So what if it's the Guanzhong torture room? Outside of Guanzhong, it's nothing. Old ancestor Demonic Abyss has already said that as long as we can get Chu Yuanxing's head, he will protect us. We will also have cultivation techniques and resources. The old ancestor Demonic Abyss that Yin Xiangzi mentioned was a notorious rogue cultivator in the demonic path. In his early years, he had suffered at the hands of Chu Kuanga and was chased by him for 3,000 miles. He had burned nearly half of his qi and blood to survive. Chu Xiao, who was standing on the treetop, smiled coldly to himself. Demonic Dao cultivators did not have long lifespans. This was because they were too good at stirring up trouble. They cultivated quickly, but they died quickly as well. However, without exception, those who could survive were all people who had become very experienced. If old ancestor Demonic Abyss really had the guts to protect them, why didn't he send his own disciples and experts? Instead, he tricked Yin Xiangzi into attacking? In the original plot, when the Guanzhong torture room sent out a large number of experts to help Chu Yuanxing take revenge, old ancestor Demonic Abyss did not even dare to let out a fart and watched Yin Xiangzi and the rest being killed. This group of people was too crude. They had used several times the number of people to pursue Chu Yuanxing and still failed. If Chu Xiao had been the one to set up the trap, this kind of crushing power would not have been able to kill the other party and Chu Xiao could have committed suicide. However, Chu Xiao still wanted to add fuel to the fire. If there were no accidents, according to the original plot, Chu Yuanxing and the others should have split up and started to escape. Yin Xiangzi and his group of idiots chased after the wrong people. By the time they reacted and turned back to chase, it was already too late. Chu Yuanxing had already reached the border of Guanzhong. Yin Xiangzi only killed 2 of Chu Yuanxing's guards who were blocking the rear, but allowed Chu Yuanxing to successfully escape. If he didn't force Chu Yuanxing into a corner, how could he show the importance of his timely help? Chu Xiao's figure moved and formed the inner binding seal. Instantly, his figure was like a ghost as he suddenly appeared in front of Yin Xiangzi and the others. Yin Xiangzi and the others were complaining to each other when a person suddenly appeared in front of them, giving them a huge fright. At this moment, Chu Xiao was dressed in black and his face was covered with a black cloth. However, he still wore the black iron bamboo hat of the Blue Dragon Society. However, The golden dragon pattern on it had been erased by him. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary bamboo hat. This bamboo hat of the Blue Dragon Society had the effect of concealing one's aura. Chu Xiu really couldn't bear to throw it away. Who is it? Yin Xiangzi and the others immediately pulled out their weapons and stared at Chu Xiu like a tiger watching its prey. Of course it's someone who is helping you. Chu Xiu used a deliberately hoarse voice and said indifferently. A strong man holding a blade beside Yin Xiangzi coldly snorted and said, "So secretive and sneaky. What are you trying to do? I hate people like you the most." As soon as he finished speaking, the burly man slashed at Chu Xiu with his saber. In an instant, a black saber whizzed down. On the shadow of the saber, there was actually a phantom image of an evil spirit wailing. It looked exceptionally evil. Chu Xiu casually took a step forward and the red sleeve blade in his hand was unsheathed. In an instant, everyone could only see a crimson blade light shining between heaven and earth. It was extremely fast and extremely beautiful. The blood-refined divine wind suddenly erupted. The ferocious killing intent and the scarlet color of blood covered everything. In the blink of an eye, the burly man's blade was torn apart, and even the blade in his hand was blasted away. He retreated more than 10 steps and a stream of blood flowed out of his mouth. Chu Xiu indifferently said, "Why must you make a move? This isn't a good habit. Can't everyone talk calmly?" Yin Xiangzi and the others looked at Chu Xiu with an incomparable fear in their eyes. The person in front of them was simply unbelievably powerful. If he had launched a sneak attack just now, with everyone's strength, no one had the confidence that they could block his blade. Yin Xiangzi cautiously said, "Friend, who are you? You want to stop us from killing Chu Yuanxing?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said indifferently, "On the contrary, I'm here to help you kill Chu Yuanxing." As he said that, Chu Xiu threw out a piece of paper and said, "Chu Yuanxing will split up and escape according to this route. You should know what to do." Holding that piece of paper, Yin Xiangzi doubtfully asked, "Then why do you want to help us kill Chu Yuanxing?" Chu Xiu turned around and said indifferently, "In the past, Chu Yuanxing offended many people. Now that he's dead, his son is still living in glory. In this world, you're not the only one who wants him dead. It's just that my identity is special, so it's not convenient for me to make a move. Otherwise, do you think Chu Yuanxing would still be alive now?" As he said that, Chu Xiu's figure moved and he directly flashed into the dense forest and disappeared. The strong man who was blasted away by Chu Xiu walked over and asked, "Is what this person said true?" Yin Xiangzi pondered for a moment and said, "In the past, Chu Kuanga was unreasonable. Whether it was the righteous path or the demonic path, as long as there was injustice, he would interfere. In this life, Chu Kuanga has offended many people. The number of righteous path people who want him dead is no less than us demonic path people. It's just that those so-called righteous path people are all hypocrites. They have scruples about Chu Kuanga's reputation, so they don't dare to kill him even if they want to. Now that Chu Kuanga is dead, he still doesn't dare to do anything to his son. He can only secretly play these little tricks and borrow our hands to kill people. This is very normal. So I guess that person should be a disciple of some big sect, or even from a righteous path sect." However, Yin Xiangzi's tone changed and he said, "But we can't completely believe him. Since he said that Chu Yuanxing will split up and escape, then we'll chase after them and see if Chu Yuanxing will split up. If Chu Yuanxing really did split up, then we'll also split into 2 groups. Anyway, with our strength, even if we split into 2 groups, we'll still be able to crush the enemy." After making the decision, Yin Xiangzi and the rest immediately chased after them. As expected, not far away, they found traces of Chu Yuanxing's group splitting up. One of them was very obvious, while the other was concealed. In the original version of the plot, Yin Xiangzi thought that the obvious one was the direction that Chu Yuanxing escaped to. The concealed traces were just to deceive them. However, he didn't expect it to be the opposite, causing them to chase after the wrong person. And this time, when Yin Xiangzi saw the traces, he directly split his men into 2 groups. He himself led a portion of his men to chase after the obvious traces. This time, he didn't chase after the wrong person. In the dense forest, Chu Yuanxing was fleeing with 2 physical invulnerability realm guards. In the past, Chu Yuanxing had an extraordinary bearing. Wherever he went, people would respectfully call him Hero Chu. And don't look at how he was only in the physical invulnerability realm. Even some experts in the unity of heaven and man realm would have to be polite when they saw him. In the Guanzhong area, he lived up to his name as the hero of Guanzhong. But this time, when he was invited to Eastern Qi, he went in a grand manner. But in the end, he came back in such a sorry state. The guards around him were almost all slaughtered. Looking at the two people beside him, Chu Yuanxing couldn't help but lament, "I've let you down. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have made this trip." The two guards hurriedly said, "Young master, please don't say that. As long as we can ensure your safe return to the Guanzhong, our mission will be considered complete." The guards around Chu Yuanxing were very strong. Some were inner invulnerability realm and some were physical invulnerability realm. Some of these people were even stronger than Chu Yuanxing and had better talent than Chu Yuanxing. But they were willing to be Chu Yuanxing's guards. These people were all people who had received Chu Kuang's kindness in the past or were their descendants. They swore that they would go through fire and water for the Chu clan and be loyal to their deaths. There was no doubt about their loyalty, and they were even willing to risk their lives for Chu Yuanxing. At this moment, Yin Xiangzi's sharp and unpleasant voice sounded. "You still want to return to the Guanzhong? Dream on." Behind the mountain path, Yin Xiangzi and a few others had already caught up. There were 4 physical invulnerability realm martial artists and the rest were inner invulnerability realm. Seeing that there were only 2 people beside Chu Yuanxing, Yin Xiangzi instantly thought that it was a close call. Luckily, he had listened to the mysterious person and chased over. This Chu Yuanxing had indeed tricked him. The other side was the trail he had left behind. Chu Yuanxing's expression was ugly as he shouted, "Yin Xiangzi, if you kill me today, the Guanzhong torture room will definitely send out countless experts to chase you to the ends of the earth." Yin Xiangzi laughed in disdain. "Idiot! Do you really think that the Guanzhong torture room is still the same as when your father was the hallmaster? Let's not talk about whether the Guanzhong torture room would be willing to spend so much effort to avenge you. Since I dared to kill you today, do you think I don't have a backer behind me? Don't talk nonsense. Kill him." As soon as he finished, Yin Xiangzi waved his hand and a group of people instantly charged forward. On Chu Yuanxing's side, his 2 bodyguards were very strong. However, Chu Yuanxing, the son of Chu Juxia in the past, seemed a little weak. In terms of cultivation techniques and cultivation resources, Chu Yuanxing did not lack them. What he lacked was the experience of life and death battles. In the past, when Chu Yuanxing roamed the pugilistic world, he strictly followed his father's wishes to be chivalrous and help the weak. However, in reality, most people would give him face on account of his father and the Guanzhong torture room. And those who didn't want to give him face were people from some big sections. He couldn't do anything to them. As for those who could give him a chance to attack, most of them were villains and bandits who weren't very strong. They were all weaker than him. When Chu Yuanxing attacked, he could only crush them. Therefore, in these few decades, he had almost never had a life and death battle. Even if he did, it was done by his bodyguards. Now that he really attacked, after a few moves, Chu Yuanxing was already in danger. Chapter 143. Chu Yuanxing's 2 bodyguards were very strong, but there were too many people on Yin Xiangzi's side. In addition, Chu Yuanxing himself couldn't do much. After a few minutes, the 2 bodyguards were already heavily injured. "Young master, run first. We'll cover you." Chu Yuanxing opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. However, he didn't move his feet. He wasn't like his father who didn't fear death. He wasn't able to face 2 armies alone without batting an eyelid. He still had the best years of his life and he didn't want to die in the hands of Yin Xiangzi and the others. But at the same time, if he had to abandon these 2 bodyguards who had grown up with him and run for his life, Chu Yuanxing wouldn't be able to do such a thing. Chu Yuanxing's ability was mediocre and it also affected his character to be somewhat indecisive. At this moment, he could either fight or run. However, he was stuck here and didn't know what to do. On the other side, his 2 bodyguards had already used all their strength. They even used methods like burning their blood essence to drag the 2 of them down with them. Unfortunately, it was still useless in the end. Yin Xiangzi let out a sigh. 2 physical invulnerability realm martial artists who weren't weak were really hard to deal with. He didn't understand. Just based on the small favors Chu Kuanga had given them in the past, Why would these people fight with their lives? Looking at the isolated and helpless Chu Yuanqing, Yin Xiangzi laughed sinisterly and said coldly, Chu Yuanqing, you didn't expect this, right? You'd have such a day. In the past, your father was so mighty and domineering. The great hero Chu Kuanga was praised by everyone in the pugilistic world. However, his reputation was built by stepping on the corpses of my generation. We're all people whose hands are stained with blood. Who's more noble than the other? Today, I'll chop off your head and offer it to my master. Looking at Yin Xiangzi, who walked over with a sinister smile on his face, Chu Yuanqing was filled with despair. He even started to doubt his life. Ever since he was born, he had been instilled with stories about his father. It could be said that he grew up listening to the legends of his father. Later on, he couldn't help but imitate his father's chivalry, wanting to not tarnish his father's reputation. Unfortunately, in the end, he was only a Guanzhong hero. He could not become a great hero praised by the entire Jianghu like his father. Perhaps this was not the path he wanted to take from the beginning. It was just a path arranged for him by others, because the son of the giant hero Chu Kuanga should also be a chivalrous and righteous hero. Unfortunately, Chu Yuanqing knew that he wasn't. His sense of chivalry was limited to what he could do, and he could not face death as calmly as his father. Now that he was about to die, he could still feel fear and tremble. Just as Chu Yuanqing was about to lose all hope, a voice came from behind him. You're just a bunch of flies trying to gain personal gains. When Chu Juxia was still alive, you didn't dare to jump out, but now you're trying to show off. No matter what Chu Juxia's character is, at least he's upright and has the spirit of a Jianghu person. He's not like you guys. You're just a bunch of clowns. Chu Xiao had changed into a short Cyan warrior's attire, revealing his original appearance as he slowly walked out. At this moment, Chu Xiao's physical invulnerability realm aura was as sharp as a knife. A powerful aura spread out as he walked, easily tearing apart the branches and leaves around him. Yin Xiangzi and the others' expressions immediately turned serious. They only had 2 physical invulnerability realm warriors on their side. If it was just an ordinary person, they wouldn't care. However, this physical invulnerability realm warrior in front of them didn't look like he was easy to deal with. This made Yin Xiangzi and the others feel uncertain. Yin Xiangzi said coldly, Who are you? Looking at your age, you shouldn't have anything to do with Chu Kuanga. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business. Chu Xiao said indifferently, I have nothing to do with Chu Juxia, and I'm not even considered a good person, but I admire Chu Juxia's broad-mindedness and character the most. If you want to seek revenge on Chu Juxia's son, I naturally won't care if you issue a challenge in an open and above-board manner. However, I can't bear to see a bunch of clowns like you trying to show off your power here. You even dare to insult Chu Juxia's reputation. After being insulted by Chu Xiao, Yin Xiangzi's expression suddenly changed. He shouted, You're courting death. As his voice fell, Yin Xiangzi directly struck out with his palm. A pitch-black aura exploded and his palm contained extreme negative energy. It could even disturb the opponent's mind from several feet away. 7 Slaughter Demon Palm. Yin Xiangzi's master was the famous 7 Slaughter Old Ghost of the demonic path in the past. His 7 Slaughter Demon Palm gathered all the negative emotions of greed, anger, stupidity, hatred, and resentment. It was very evil and powerful. It was similar to Chu Xiao's 3 Blades of Avicii, which was based on hatred. However, it wasn't as extreme as the 3 Blades of Avicii. Chu Xiao sneered and used the 9 words formula, Army Formula, Great Vajra Wheel Seal. With a loud bang, the golden aura in Chu Xiao's seal surged. It was like Vajra suppressing the world and subduing demons. When the seal landed, all evils retreated and Yin Xiangzi's black aura was shattered. He couldn't help but take a few steps back and his arms couldn't help but tremble. Buddhist Cultivation Method. Yin Xiangzi's face revealed a trace of astonishment. He could be considered to be experienced and knowledgeable. The instant Chu Xiao used the fast and slow 9 words formula, he recognized the Buddhist imprint on this cultivation technique. And at this moment, Chu Yuanqing, who was behind Chu Xiao, revealed a glimmer of hope. Even he didn't expect that when he was in despair, there would really be someone who would save him. Before this, he was still doubting life, wondering if it was right for him to only imitate his father in this life. But now, with the appearance of Chu Xiao, there was no doubt in his mind. It was because of his father's reputation in the past that there would still be people who would come to save him because of his father's reputation. Chu Yuanxing didn't hope to achieve the level of his father in the past, but if he could at least achieve half of his father's level, this reputation would be enough for him to eat for the rest of his life. And at this moment, in the field, Yin Xiangzi was forced back by Chu Xiu's great Vajra wheel seal. The other physical invulnerability realm martial artist appeared behind Chu Xiu out of nowhere. With a point of his finger, a pitch-black finger force condensed into a small sword and silently appeared behind Chu Xiu in an instant. That finger force was extremely sinister and could actually corrode Chu Xiu's protective aura. But at this moment, the seal in Chu Xiu's hand changed. Lin Formula. Solitary seal. In an instant, Chu Xiu's entire body's protective aura condensed together. He was as immovable as a mountain, impervious to fire and water. That sinister aura didn't affect Chu Xiu at all. Instead, it made Chu Xiu turn around. His figure instantly appeared in front of the other party, and the great Vajra wheel seal landed. This seal caused the other party to vomit blood. Previously, Yin Xiangzi's strength was considered relatively strong among the physical invulnerability realm, so he was able to take Chu Xiu's great Vajra wheel seal head-on. But this physical invulnerability realm martial artist's strength was very ordinary. He couldn't withstand the power of Chu Xiu's great Vajra wheel seal and directly vomited blood. The martial artist's finger shadows drifted, wanting to hit Chu Xiu. Behind him, Yin Xiangzi also rushed over, wanting to help. But a scarlet-red aura suddenly erupted from Chu Xiu's hand. It brought with it a ferocious killing intent and a bloody aura. The refined blood god aura exploded, directly shattering the other party's finger strength. Using the great sacrificial grappling hand, he instantly pulled the other party in front of him. With a twist of his hand, the martial artist's head was instantly twisted off. Even Yin Xiangzi's mouth twitched when he saw this bloody scene. Chu Yuanxing, who was behind him, even shivered. If this person hadn't come to save him and used Buddhist martial arts, he would have suspected that this person in front of him was a demon even more evil than Yin Xiangzi. Chu Xiu stretched out his hand and directly threw the martial artist's corpse towards Yin Xiangzi. His body also rushed towards Yin Xiangzi, the great violet sun palm of extinguishing heaven and earth smashing out, colliding with Yin Xiangzi's seven slaughter demon palm. With a loud bang, Chu Xiu's hand turned pitch black while Yin Xiangzi's hand turned deep purple. When the purple sun devil flame entered his body, Yin Xiangzi instantly groaned and his expression suddenly changed. Chu Xiu casually waved his hand. With his powerful cultivation and the glass gold thread goo in his body to suppress all evil things, it was basically impossible for the seven slaughter demon palm's power to affect Chu Xiu. On the other hand, Yin Xiangzi needed to use his own internal force to suppress the power of the purple sun devil flame. Otherwise, the intense pain was not something he could endure. Looking at the corpse of the physical aura realm martial artist on the ground, Yin Xiangzi's eyes revealed a hint of unwillingness. He was just one step away from killing Chu Yuanxing, taking revenge for his master and at the same time receiving the reward from old ancestor Demon Abyss. But in the end, a meddlesome martial artist appeared out of nowhere and this meddlesome martial artist was unbelievably strong. Retreat! Yin Xiangzi shouted unwillingly and prepared to retreat with the other inner aura realm martial artists. The opponent's strength was unfathomable. If they continued fighting, he would die here. At this moment, Chu Xiu said indifferently, "You want to leave just like that? Did you ask for my opinion?" Chu Xiu's body moved and he already rushed towards Yin Xiangzi and the others. Yin Xiangzi's face revealed a hint of ruthlessness and he shouted, "You still want to kill us all?" "You guessed it right." With that said, the red sleeve blade in Chu Xiu's hand was unsheathed. The crimson blade light and the incomparably magnificent blade instantly stunned Yin Xiangzi. This magnificent and resplendent blade left a deep impression on him. It was incomparably familiar. He had seen such a blade just now. Yin Xiangzi shouted angrily, "It's you!" But before he could finish his sentence, a layer of black fog was already lingering on Chu Xiu's blade. The power of the blood-refined god shield and the Avicii Dao's three blades suddenly exploded. This incomparably terrifying blade seemed to have been slashed from hell and directly slashed Yin Xiangzi into two. Until his death, Yin Xiangzi did not understand whether this person wanted to kill Chu Yuanxing or save Chu Yuanxing. Chapter 144. Yin Xiangzi was killed by Chu Xiu's saber, and the rest of the warriors in the inner strong realm couldn't escape even if they wanted to. After everyone was killed, Chu Yuanxing walked over and bowed to Chu Xiao. With a grateful expression he said, "Thank you for saving me, brother. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to return to Guangzhou." From the previous conversation, Chu Yuanxing also knew that the person in front of him didn't owe his Chu clan a favor. He only helped because he admired his father, so now he owed him a favor. Chu Xiao waved his hand casually and said, "Hero Chu, you don't have to be so polite. In this life, the person I admire the most is a person like your father. He can persist in his own thoughts. Even if there are millions of people, he will still go forward. If there were more people like Hero Chu in Jianghu, the current Jianghu wouldn't be so chaotic. Also, great Hero Chu, I also admire you. Great Hero Chu has inherited your father's legacy. You are a chivalrous and righteous man. You have benefited Jianghu, and you have never considered your own interests. I admire you for this." Hearing Chu Xiao say this, Chu Yuanxing was also happy. There were many people in Jianghu who praised his father. Even if they met him, they would praise his father, so Chu Yuanxing was already used to it. But there weren't many people who praised him. Even if there were, most of them were people who flattered him. Chu Yuanxing was just a mediocre and indecisive person, but that didn't mean he was really stupid. He could see clearly who was sucking up to him. The strength of the person in front of him was so strong, and he was definitely one of the best among his peers. He even saved him just now. What was the use of such an existence to flatter him? In fact, the first half of what Chu Xiao said was true. He really admired people like Chu Kuanga. What he admired was not Chu Kuanga's chivalrous actions, but the spirit in his heart. As long as it was something he wanted to do, no matter what the road ahead was, no matter how many difficulties and obstacles there were, he could still maintain the spirit of thousands of people. Such a person could be called a hero of a generation. However, although Chu Xiao admired such a person, he would not become such a person, because such people usually did not live to the end. When facing 10 million people, Chu Xiao also had the courage to attack. However, at that time, he would either have the confidence to deal with 10 million people, or Chu Xiao would use all means to kill the 10 million people until there were only 1 million or 100,000 people left. To put it simply, Chu Xiao wouldn't act recklessly if he wasn't confident. Chu Yuanxing cupped his hands towards Chu Xiao and said, "Anyway, it's all thanks to brother that I survived this disaster. May I know brother's name, and which sect do you come from?" Chu Xiao cupped his hands and said, "Well, I am Chu Xiao. As for my background, I don't want to talk about it. Hero Chu is a good person, but I am not a good person. My background is really a bit difficult to talk about." Chu Yuanxing said softly, "Your surname is also Chu, it's really fate. But why can't I talk about my background? Brother Chu, are you from the demonic path?" "It doesn't matter, although most of the people who want to kill me are from the demonic path. I actually don't have any prejudice against demonic path people. In the past, my father once said that the people in this world can't be simply summarized as righteous and demonic. In the righteous path, there are many hypocrites and ambitious people, and in the demonic path, there are also those who were forced to join the demonic path, as well as those who are free and easy in the pugilistic world." Chu Xiao sighed and said, "People in the pugilistic world have no choice. I come from a small family, but because of a family incident, I was forced to wander the pugilistic world. I had no choice but to join the Blue Dragon Society and become an assassin. My hands are already stained with the blood of innocent people, so naturally, I can't be considered a good person." Chu Yuanxing was puzzled and said, "Chu Xiao? Why does this name sound so familiar?" At first, when he heard Chu Xiao's name, Chu Yuanxing didn't feel anything. Later, when he heard Chu Xiao say that he used to be an assassin in the Blue Dragon Society, Chu Yuanxing felt that the name was familiar. Chu Xiao smiled and said, "Great Hero Chu should have seen my name on the Tiger and Dragon list." Hearing Chu Xiao's words, Chu Yuanxing suddenly realized and said, "The 18th place on the Tiger and Dragon list, Chu Xiao. No wonder brother Chu is so strong, so it turns out that you are a young hero on the Tiger and Dragon list." Chu Yuanxing was also on the Tiger and Dragon list, but with his current age, he had long been removed from the list. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to the Tiger and Dragon list. In particular, Chu Xiao had made a name for himself in the Northern Yan Kingdom, so the people who were familiar with him were mostly in the Northern Yan Kingdom. Chu Yuanxing also occasionally heard others talking about the changes in the rankings of some of the young talents on the Longhu list, so he had some impression of him. Then Chu Yuanxing patted Chu Xiu's shoulder and said, "Brother Chu doesn't need to worry about it. Being an assassin in the Blue Dragon Society isn't something that can't be said. Who knows about the grudges of the people in the world? Buddhists always say that one can become a Buddha after laying down the butcher's knife, right? By the way, Brother Chu, did you come here because of the Blue Dragon Society's mission? But since you are from the Northern Yen, you should belong to the Northern Yen branch. Why are you here?" Chu Yuanxing didn't really care about Chu Xiu's identity. This was because his father had instilled some ideas in him. Whether it was good or evil, whether it was right or wrong, whether it was good or evil, whether it was right or wrong, it wasn't determined by one's birth. Chu Yuanxing didn't understand this as deeply as his father. He only knew that the person in front of him was his savior, and he admired his father and his character. Naturally, Chu Yuanxing wanted to side with Chu Xiu. In any case, even Chu Kuanga's good friend from back in the day was from the path of devils. Therefore, he had already prepared himself for the possibility that Chu Xiu was a villain from the path of devils. But it turned out that Chu Xiu was just an assassin from the Azure Dragon Society. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "No, I have already betrayed the Blue Dragon Society. I came from the Heavenly Sin branch, and the branch leader was too selfish. He wanted to use me to steal the treasure, so I could only choose to betray the Blue Dragon Society. And because of the treasure, I was chased by a few big sects in the Northern Yen. I can't live in the Northern Yen anymore, so I can only prepare to go elsewhere. The Guanzhong area is in the center of the Three Kingdoms, and the martial path is flourishing. There is also the Guanzhong torture room, so it is orderly and orderly. Also, it doesn't have the pressure of those big sections. This time, I want to go there." When Chu Yuanxing heard this, his eyes lit up. He was just thinking about how to return the favor to Chu Xiu, and now the opportunity was here. Chu Yuanxing said directly, "Brother Chu, since you have betrayed the Blue Dragon Society, then don't go back. Stay in the Guanzhong area. You are my savior." It is hard to say in other places, but in the Guanzhong area, it is very easy to arrange. If you don't mind, I can recommend you to enter the Guanzhong torture room. Chu Xiu's eyes slightly narrowed. This Chu Yuanxing was more generous than he thought. He didn't even get to say some things, but the other party directly said everything for him. It had to be said that Chu Yuanxing was quite good in some aspects. However, on the surface, Chu Xiu still put on a slightly hesitant expression and said, "But my identity is, after all, sensitive. Is it really appropriate to enter the Guanzhong torture room?" Chu Yuanxing casually waved his hand and said, "If the Guanzhong torture room doesn't reveal your background, then the identity of a Blue Dragon Society member is nothing. How about this, Brother Chu, your surname is also Chu, so you don't have to call me Hero Chu. You can just call me Big Brother, and I will tell others that you are my distant cousin. If my cousin, Chu Yuanxing, wants to enter the Guanzhong torture room, not to mention that you are only from the Blue Dragon Society, even if you are from the Kunlun Devil Cult, it won't be a problem." Upon hearing this, Chu Xiu directly cupped his hands at Chu Yuanxing and said, "Thank you, Big Brother." Chu Yuanxing waved his hand and said, "Brother, you don't have to be so polite. Today you saved me. Recommending you to enter the Guanzhong torture room is just a small matter." For Chu Yuanxing, this was really a small matter, because he knew that the entire Guanzhong torture room, including the current hallmaster of the Guanzhong torture room, Guan Siyu, owed his father. Of course they had to repay this favor, and they had to repay it for the rest of their lives. Recommending talents to the Guanzhong torture room was not the first time that Chu Yuanxing had done this kind of thing. However, in the past, he only recommended some ordinary constables in the pugilistic world. As long as they had some ability, Chu Yuanxing didn't mind doing them a favor at little cost. But now, Chu Xiu was his savior. Not only did he have to recommend Chu Xiu to the Guanzhong torture room, but he also had to get a good position for Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu looked at the sky and said, "In this case, let's hurry back to Guanzhong now. This is the border between Guanzhong and Eastern Qi. Although it is very close to Guanzhong, it is still a bit dangerous." Chu Yuanxing looked at the corpses of his two guards on the ground, and couldn't help but reveal a trace of sadness in his eyes. He said to Chu Xiu, "Brother, bring their corpses back as well. They grew up with me. Although they are called guards, They are actually like my brothers. In the end, because they protected me, they both died here. Chu Xiao pretended to comfort him and said, Big brother, please restrain your grief. The dead can't come back to life. Chu Yuanxing nodded. He also knew that the crisis was not over yet. It was not the time to be sad, so he immediately followed Chu Xiao to Guanzhong with the bodies. The scenery of Guanzhong was completely different from that of northern Yan or eastern Qi. There were no big cities in Guanzhong. Instead, there were small cities everywhere. Several or even more than 10 small cities could form a large state capital. There was a reason for this. In the past, Guanzhong was located between 3 countries. Although it was very large, it was a place of war. Some large cities could not be built at all. It was possible that as soon as one side was built, the other side would fight and the city would be destroyed. Now the entire Guanzhong was roughly divided into 4 areas: Guanzhong, Guannan, Guanxi, and Guanbei. Guanzhong City in the center was the largest city in Guanzhong. The Guanzhong torture room was also located here. Chapter 145. Guanzhong City was located in the center of the entire Guanzhong land. It was black on the outside and could be said to be the strangest city in the world. It was an iron city. In the past, the Guanzhong area was filled with the flames of war. The people of the Guanzhong martial arts world built the Guanzhong torture room to establish order. Therefore, they prepared to build a city that would not fall in front of the armies of the 3 countries. They wrapped the city walls with black iron, making it extremely strong. Even a martial arts grandmaster who could break rivers and shatter mountains would not be able to destroy such a city of iron. The entire Guanzhong torture room took 100 years to complete the construction of Guanzhong City. Its scale was comparable to the capital cities of large countries like Northern Yan, Eastern Qi, and Western Chu. As soon as he stepped into Guanzhong City, Chu Xiao felt that the warriors in Guanzhong gave him a different feeling. The warriors here gave people a more confident feeling. Even the warriors at the bottom were full of fighting spirit and vitality. In the Northern Yan Kingdom, most of the low-level warriors could only be regarded as ordinary Jianghu people. For the sake of some money or cultivation resources, everyone would cling to the rich and powerful and kill each other. Between warriors, there was a strong hostility and slyness. But because of historical reasons, there were no deep-rooted sects that had been passed down for more than 1,000 years in Guanzhong. Even the current big sects and families in Guanzhong were ordinary warriors at the bottom hundreds of years ago. Coupled with the restrictions of the Guanzhong torture room, the oppression the warriors at the bottom here did not suffer too much. Guanzhong was located in the center of the trade between the 3 countries. It was unusually prosperous and there were many opportunities. Simply put, in Guanzhong, as long as you had the ability, you did not have to worry about being buried. Because of Chu Kuangge's last words, Chu Yuanxing's residence was not in the Guanzhong torture room, but in a large mansion in Guanzhong City. Although Chu Yuanxing's way of doing things was somewhat similar to his father's, he wasn't completely devoid of his own thoughts. For example, Chu Kuangge used to be extremely thrifty and only lived in the Guanzhong torture room. He did not even have a house of his own and did not like any luxurious worldly possessions. But Chu Yuanxing was different. He liked luxury and enjoyment. What he liked most was to show off, such as calligraphy and paintings. As a martial artist, Chu Yuanxing's martial arts were not the strongest among his peers, but his calligraphy and painting skills were few and far between. At that moment, Chu Yuanxing had been chased all the way. It could be said that he was in a very sorry state. He first returned to his own courtyard and changed into a set of embroidered robes. Then, he brought Chu Xiao to the Guanzhong Disciplinary Hall. The Guanzhong torture room was located in the center of Guanzhong City. A large area of courtyards and high-rise buildings were grouped together, separated by walls. But both the courtyards and the walls were like the city walls of Guanzhong City, reinforced and cast with black iron, giving it a solemn feeling. There was no lion in front of the Guanzhong torture room. Instead, there was a long sword and a long saber as tall as a person. It symbolized the Guanzhong torture room's purpose all along, to stop wars with martial arts, and to establish order in the torture chamber. Even the signboard of the Guanzhong torture hall was not a wooden signboard, but a black iron signboard, carved with all kinds of weapons. It was said that these 4 words were carved with weapons by all the people who joined forces to build the Guanzhong torture room in the past. An extremely sharp aura rushed out. Most of the people who came to the Guanzhong torture room were the Jianghu constables that belonged to the Guanzhong torture room. The Jianghu constables were dressed very differently. They wore ordinary warrior clothes, but according to their levels, they were divided into cyan, gray, and black. Generally, body tempering and blood condensation realm practitioners wore cyan, innate and inner invulnerability realm practitioners wore gray, and those in black were usually the rulers of the Guanzhong torture room. The weakest of them was at least in the physical invulnerability realm. There were also some modifications to their warrior clothes. Their shoulders, forearms, and chests were all covered with refined black iron armor with Taotai patterns. While it didn't affect their movements, it could also increase their defensive power. This was also because most of the Jianghu constables acted alone to catch criminals who had broken the law in Guanzhong. Therefore, the Guanzhong torture room tried its best to increase their combat power. Other than that, most of the Jianghu constables in the Guanzhong torture room carried a huge iron box that was half the height of a person on their back. Inside the box were some spare weapons and some hidden weapons, as well as tools used in solving cases. The Jianghu constables who came from the Guanzhong torture room were very capable. They could hunt down criminals and thieves for thousands of miles on their own. When dealing with cases of revenge in the Jianghu, they could easily deduce detailed information about the murderer. Therefore, whether it was in the Three Kingdoms or some of the big sects in the Jianghu, they would usually look for the Jianghu constables from the Guanzhong torture room to deal with such matters. Of course, this wasn't voluntary work. It required money. Chu Yuanxing led Chu Xiao all the way into the Guanzhong torture room. The Jianghu constables who passed by all bowed respectfully to Chu Yuanxing and shouted, "Master Chu!" Chu Xiao could see that at least 90% of the Jianghu constables' respect was sincere. It could be seen that Chu Yuanxing's status in the Guanzhong torture room was high. Of course, from this point of view, it was very important to have a good father. For Chu Yuanxing, Chu Kuangga's legacy was enough for him to enjoy for a lifetime. If Guan Siyu could live long, it wouldn't be a problem for his son to enjoy it for a lifetime. They walked all the way to the backyard of the Guanzhong torture room, where Guan Siyu had been living. Like Chu Kuangga, Guan Siyu didn't like luxury and didn't have a house outside. Chu Yuanxing was just about to knock on the door when the door of the house was suddenly opened. A woman walked out. Even Chu Xiao was a little stunned when he saw that woman's appearance. He felt like he was dazzled. The woman's appearance was extremely beautiful. She had black eyebrows and red lips. Her facial features could only be described as perfect. She looked to be in her 30s, but she didn't look old at all. Instead, it added a bit of a mature charm. Her fiery red wide gauze dress couldn't hide her seductive figure, which was as tempting as a ripe peach. In fact, the most attractive thing about this woman wasn't her appearance or figure, but her temperament. It was an extremely awkward feeling. Her temperament was cold and elegant, but when combined with her appearance and figure, she gave off an extremely charming and seductive feeling. The more serious her expression was, the colder her temperament was, but the more seductive she gave off the illusion that she was. Chu Xiao could be considered to have seen the world in his previous life. Whether it was in real life or on TV, none of them could be compared to the woman in front of him. What they lacked wasn't in appearance, but in temperament that was a mixture of coldness and charm. Simply put, this woman was the kind of woman who would make people think of bed at first sight. At this moment, when Chu Yuanxing saw this woman, he actually became a little nervous. He bowed to the woman and said, "Sister-in-law." Chu Xiao looked at Chu Yuanxing in surprise. In this Guanzhong torture room, Chu Yuanxing had never been so polite to anyone. On the contrary, others would take the initiative to greet him, even if they were stronger than him. The woman nodded lightly and said indifferently, "Are you here to look for Master? Master is handling official business inside. You can go in." With that, the woman left directly. She only glanced at Chu Xiao and didn't say anything. After the woman left, Chu Xiao asked in confusion, "This is?" Chu Yuanxing whispered, "This is Guan Siyu, Brother Guan's wife, Mei Qinglian." Chu Yuanxing just wanted to say something, but he held it back again. He just said softly, "Anyway, she is Brother Guan's wife. It's always right to be respectful to her." Hearing Chu Yuanxing said so, Chu Xiao's expression was slightly weird. If he didn't count it wrong, the current Guanzhong torture room's hallmaster, the Iron Mask Judge, Guan Siyu, should be in his 70s. Of course, Guan Siyu was a martial arts master of the real pellet state. His lifespan was as long as 300 years. He was actually in his prime. However, Guan Xiyu was rumored to be upright, impartial, and strict. In the end, he married such a wife, which made Chu Xiu feel a little strange. Chu Yuanxing didn't say much. He just took Chu Xiu into the house and knocked on the door of a study room. "Come in." A low and dignified voice came from the study room. Chu Yuanxing pushed the door and entered. The study room was full of all kinds of official documents, which seemed a little messy. A middle-aged man who looked about 40 or 50 years old was sitting in the center. This person was the famous Guanzhong torture room hallmaster, the Iron Mask Judge, Guan Xiyu, who was ranked 8th on the martial arts master list. The martial arts master list was not only ranked according to strength, but also based on one's reputation in the martial arts world. The wind-sweeping tower didn't count. Only the recognized reputation of the martial arts world counted. Guan Xiyu's strength was actually not as powerful as other powerhouses on the martial arts master list. For example, his ranking on the martial arts master list was even higher than the great dragon head of the Blue Dragon Society, Bu Tiannan, but in fact, his strength was far inferior to Bu Tiannan. However, the Guanzhong torture room completely rose in his hands. With its current status in the martial arts world, it could be said to be a big shot who stirred up the martial arts world. Therefore, even if his strength was not comparable to Bu Tiannan's, his ranking was still above Bu Tiannan's. At this time, Chu Xiu was also sizing up Guan Xiyu. This person was tall and wore an ordinary black robe. He had a square face and a dignified expression. He had 3 long strands of beard and a slightly red face. At this time, because there were no outsiders in the study room, Guan Xiyu restrained his aura. He looked like an ordinary person, but Chu Xiu could still feel an extremely strong pressure from him. Part of it was because he was a martial Dao Grandmaster powerhouse, and there was also the majestic aura that he had accumulated after being in charge of the Guanzhong Punishment Hall for decades. Even if he tried to restrain it, he could not restrain it much. Chapter 146. Chu Yuanxing led Chu Xiu into the study and cupped his hands at Guan Xiyu. "Brother Guan." Although Guan Xiyu was 30 years older than Chu Yuanxing, he had been Chu Kuanga's subordinate in the past. He had only achieved what he had because of Chu Kuanga's promotion. Therefore, Guan Xiyu had always treated Chu Yuanxing as an equal. Guan Xiyu was very serious in front of others, but when he saw Chu Yuanxing come in, he smiled and said, "Weren't you invited to the Shangyang Mo family in Eastern Qi to attend the Mo family's patriarch's 300th birthday? Why are you back so soon?" Chu Yuanxing had a sad look on his face. "Don't mention it. I almost couldn't make it back. I was ambushed by the 7 murder ghosts' disciple, Yingxiangzi, and his men. Asi and the others died protecting me. If it weren't for Brother Chu's help, I'm afraid I wouldn't have made it back." With that, Chu Yuanxing pulled Chu Xiu to his side and introduced him to Guan Xiyu. "Greetings, Hall Master Guan." Chu Xiu cupped his hands at Guan Xiyu respectfully. Guan Xiyu nodded at Chu Xiu. Then he said gloomily, "Don't worry. The Guanzhong torture room will demand an explanation from those people." Chu Yuanxing quickly said, "There's no need. Yingxiangzi has been killed by Brother Chu. My revenge has been avenged." Guan Xiyu looked at Chu Xiu in surprise. Then he said lightly, "Although Yingxiangzi is dead, your revenge has not been avenged." Chu Yuanxing was puzzled. Yingxiangzi had been killed by Chu Xiu. Why hadn't his revenge been avenged? Guan Xiyu suddenly turned to look at Chu Xiu and said, "What do you think?" Chu Xiu smiled. He knew that Guan Xiyu should have noticed something. This should be a test. Guan Xiyu had been in charge of the Guanzhong torture room for many years. He was impartial, but he wasn't an idiot who didn't understand the ways of the world. In the past, Chu Yuanxing only needed to inform his subordinates to place people in the Guanzhong torture room. The other people in the Guanzhong torture room would naturally do it. But now, Chu Yuanxing had brought Chu Xiu to see him and mentioned that Chu Xiu had saved his life. Clearly, he was going to use the method of arranging Chu Xiu into the punishment hall to thank him for his kindness. Moreover, this position could not be too low. Otherwise, Chu Yuanxing would lose face. However, no matter how great Chu Yuanxing's reputation was, Guan Xiyu had to see the quality of the person in front of him. If the person in front of him was an idiot, even with Chu Yuanxing's recommendation, Guan Xiyu would not arrange for him to be in an important position. Chu Xiao said to Chu Yuanxing, who was beside him, in a deep voice. Big brother, think about it carefully. Yin Xiangzi's master, the 7 Kills Ghost, is just an itinerant warrior. His master is dead, and he is just a stray dog. How could he have the strength to gather so many people to kill you? Furthermore, big brother, your identity is special. Aren't Yin Xiangzi and the others afraid of the Guanzhong torture room's revenge after they touch you? There's only one reason why they dare to do this and have the confidence to do so. It's because they have a backer behind them. Or it can be said that they are just a pawn. The person who really wants to kill you has never shown himself. Chu Yuanxing was dumbfounded after hearing this. Obviously, he didn't expect Chu Xiao to analyze such a simple matter and make so much sense of it. Then, who wants to kill me? After Chu Yuanxing asked this question, he seemed to think of something. He said with a depressed expression, "Pretend I didn't ask." He also recalled the enemies his father had provoked in the past. There were countless of them. There were people from the righteous path and demonic path. It could be said that there were many people in the world who wanted him dead. How could he find out? To wear the crown, one had to bear its weight. Chu Yuanxing also knew this principle. Since he had inherited all his father's connections and reputation, he naturally had to inherit these grudges. Guan Xiyu, who was on the other side, glanced at Chu Xiao and nodded slightly. His reaction was fast, and his mind was still clear. This was enough. He was afraid that Chu Yuanxing would recommend some boorish men who only had strength. If that was the case, it would be difficult for him. Although strength was important in the Guanzhong torture room, ability was more important. A brainless boorish man could not become a person with real power in the Guanzhong torture room. If Chu Xiao was such a person, he could only temporarily disregard Chu Yuanxing's face and send him to some places without real power. Guan Xiyu said to Chu Yuanxing in a deep voice, "You don't have to worry about this matter anymore. Since the other party dared to attack you, he is provoking the Guanzhong torture room. I will send someone to investigate this matter." Chu Yuanxing nodded and said, "All right, I will have to trouble you with this matter, brother Guan. There is one more thing. This brother Chu saved my life. Coincidentally, he is now wandering the underworld, so I would like to recommend him to the Guanzhong torture room. Brother Guan, brother Chu's strength is not weak. There are few martial artists of the same level who can match him. Yin Xiangzi and the other 2 physical invulnerability experts were easily killed by him." Guan Xiyu nodded casually. He knew about Chu Yuanxing's talent in martial arts. In the past, Chu Kuanga was an outstanding person, whether it was in terms of strength or character. It was a pity that Chu Yuanxing did not inherit this trait of Chu Kuanga. His attainments in martial arts could only be said to be mediocre. With his eyesight, he could tell who was a rare opponent of the same level. Anyway, he was definitely stronger than him. Seeing that Guan Xiyu did not believe him, Chu Yuanxing quickly said, "Brother Guan, you don't believe in my eyesight, but do you not believe in wind-sweeping buildings' eyesight? This brother of mine is ranked 18th on the wind-sweeping buildings Longhu leaderboard. He is definitely a young talent. The only thing is that his background is not too good. In his early years, he was threatened to join the Blue Dragon Society, but he has already betrayed them. However, to the Guanzhong torture room, his background in the Blue Dragon Society is nothing. Moreover, I am prepared to recognize him as a distant relative. To the public, I will say that he is my cousin. This way, no one can say anything." Upon hearing Chu Yuanxing say this, Guan Xiyu was really a little surprised. At his level, he did not care about the Longhu leaderboard, which only the younger generation would pay attention to. However, he knew the weight of the Longhu leaderboard. To be able to enter the Longhu leaderboard, one must either be strong or have a good background. Without a doubt, Chu Xiao was the former. There were many martial artists from the Guanzhong torture room who had entered the Longhu leaderboard. For example, he and Chu Yuanxing had been on the Longhu leaderboard before. If Chu Xiao did not rely on his background to enter the leaderboard, then he could only rely on his strength. A ranking on the Longhu leaderboard and a recommendation from Chu Yuanxing were enough to exchange for an important position in the Guanzhong torture room. Guan Xiyu pondered for a while, then looked at Chu Xiao and said, "You were recommended by Yuan Shang. Naturally, I will not let you start as a low-level constable. How about this? The West Yen penal officer, Wei Zhouduan, still lacks a patrol. Although your strength is a little lacking, you can reluctantly take up the post. Are you satisfied? Chu Xiao was still a little vague about the division of power within the Guanzhong torture room. In the original plot, he only had a general understanding of the Guanzhong area. The details were a little vague, so he did not know what the position of the patrol was. However, he believed that with Chu Yuanqing's recommendation, this position would definitely not be bad. Therefore, Chu Xiao cupped his hands and said, "If Hall Master Guan thinks that I am qualified, then I naturally do not dare to be picky." Guan Siyu nodded and shouted outside, "Yuqi, come in for a while." After a while, a young man in his 30s with a gentle temperament walked in. He cupped his hands and said to Guan Siyu and Chu Yuanqing, "Master Hero Chu." Guan Siyu pointed at Chu Xiao and said, "This is Chu Xiao. He was recommended to the Guanzhong torture room by Chu Yuanqing. It just so happens that Wei Jiuduan lacks a patrol, so I am going to let him take up the position. Take him to rest first and tell him the rules of the Guanzhong torture room. Tomorrow, take my warrant and take Chu Xiao to Guanxi to take up the post." Yuqi's face revealed a look of surprise. Obviously, he did not expect that a person who had just joined the Guanzhong torture room would be given the position of patrol. However, he quickly controlled his emotions and turned to Chu Xiao with a smile. "Brother Chu, then come with me." Chu Xiao nodded and directly followed Yuqi out of the study. After the two of them left, Chu Yuanqing said to Guan Siyu with some pride, "Brother Guan, what do you think of the person I recommended? In recent years, the Guanzhong torture room has not produced many young talents. Now, I directly pulled one over for you, and he is even in the top 20 of the Longhu list." Guan Siyu shook her head and said, "You are still too gullible. How do you know that Chu Xiao is absolutely reliable? You actually want to recognize him as a member of the Chu family." Chu Yuanqing said in surprise, "Are you saying that there is a problem with Brother Chu? You did not see the situation back then. If Brother Chu did not make a move, I would have definitely died in the hands of Yin Xiangzi. Moreover, it is not a big deal to recognize him as a distant relative of the Chu family. Everyone in the pugilistic world knows that my father was born in a farmer's family. Our Chu family has never been a big family. So what if we have a distant relative?" Guan Siyu said indifferently, "You still don't understand. Aristocratic families dominate the pugilistic world because of their foundation. Lord Chu Kuanga is famous in the pugilistic world because of his reputation. Lord Chu Kuanga's legacy is all on you. Now that you have recognized him as a distant relative, it is equivalent to using Lord Chu Kuanga's reputation to protect him. This is something that many people want but cannot obtain. It can be said that you can repay him for saving your life with just this. In the end, you even recommended him to the torture chamber." Chu Yuanqing scratched his head and said, "Anyway, I have already recommended him. Moreover, Brother Chu's strength is not bad. It is also a good thing for the Guanzhong torture room." Guan Siyu shook her head and said, "You always think of things so simply. But it doesn't matter. The Guanzhong torture room can accept anyone in the world, but we are not afraid of people playing tricks in the dark. Oh right, you just came back, so don't go back today. I will get your sister-in-law to prepare some banquet to welcome you." Upon hearing this, Chu Yuanqing hurriedly said, "Forget it, I won't trouble sister-in-law. I still have some matters to deal with in the mansion." With that, Chu Yuanqing hurriedly bid farewell and left. Chapter 147. Inside the room, Guan Siyu and Chu Yuanqing's conversation was unknown to Chu Xiao. In any case, Guan Siyu had already given the order, so Chu Xiao's goal had been achieved. Chu Xiao cupped his hands at Yuqi and asked, "May I know Brother Yuqi's name?" Yuqi was also a physical invulnerability realm martial artist, but Chu Xiao could feel that Yuqi's cultivation was much more profound than his. He might have already reached the peak of the physical invulnerability realm. Yuqi smiled and said, "Brother Chu, you can just call me Yuqi. I don't have a name, so I'm called Yuqi. I was originally an abandoned child. When I was young, my master picked me up and raised me. However, I found a wooden plate with the words Yuqi written on it, so this is both my surname and my name." Chu Xiao nodded. As a disciple raised by Guan Siyu, no matter what Yuqi's position in the Guanzhong disciplinary hall was, his status was definitely not low. Yuqi said as he walked, "I've heard about Brother Chu's story. You entered the Longhu list at such a young age. I believe that Brother Chu will definitely shine in the Guanzhong torture room in the future. Chu Xiao smiled bitterly and said, "A tall tree attracts the wind. Entering the Longhu list wasn't my intention. The disciples of large sects enter the list for the reputation of their sects and for their own reputation. But for independent cultivators like me to enter the list, other than attracting the wind and incurring grudges, there's basically no use. For example, when I entered the list, I pushed down by Wuji from the northern drifting snow city, who was originally ranked 18th. I'm sure that Bai Wuji will bear a grudge against me." Yuchi chuckled and said, "It's a blessing or a curse. When one travels the pugilistic world, one must either leave one's name or leave one's name. Who doesn't want to leave their name on the Longhu list? Moreover, if Brother Chu didn't have a ranking on the Longhu leaderboard, even with Hero Chu's recommendation, the position of patrol envoy would not have been yours." Chu Xiao asked, "By the way, Brother Yuchi, I've been in northern Yen for a long time, so I don't know much about the structure of the Guanzhong torture room. What's my rank as an inspector?" Yuchi explained in detail, "If that's the case, I'll tell you about the Guanzhong torture room in detail. After all, you'll have to know about it in the future. The Guanzhong torture room has been established for hundreds of years. The structure is very clear now. Needless to say, the person in charge of the Guanzhong torture room was the torture hall master. However, the position of hall master was also very complicated. To become a hall master, there were 3 requirements. The first was the approval of the previous hall master, and the second was the approval of all the other martial artists in the disciplinary hall. As for the last requirement, it required the approval of Northern Yen, Eastern Qi, and Western Chu. The Guanzhong torture room is in existence between the pugilistic world and the imperial court. The 3 countries recognize the status of the Guanzhong torture room and even the law, but at the same time, the Guanzhong torture room had to return the favor. We promised not to participate in the disputes between the 3 countries and maintain absolute neutrality. Therefore, the hall master had to be someone that the 3 countries recognized as selfless and neutral. These 3 requirements were set by the Guanzhong torture room in the past few decades. You should know the history of the Guanzhong torture room. It was rather chaotic and there were no clear rules. It wasn't until my master led the rise of the Guanzhong torture room 30 years ago that the Guanzhong torture room achieved its current status. At this point, Yuchi's tone was somewhat proud. After all, in the hundreds of years of history of the Guanzhong torture room, even if the name of the founder had been forgotten, no one would forget the names of 2 people. One was Chu Kuanga, and the other was Guan Siyu. Of these 2 people, one laid the foundation and reputation for the Guanzhong torture room, while the other led the Guanzhong torture room to rise from the cracks between the 3 countries. Their role in the Guanzhong torture room was irreplaceable. Not to say that there would never be a successor, but at least it was unprecedented. Yuchi continued, "In addition to the hall master, there are 4 disciplinary officers in charge of the disciplinary hall: Guandong, Guannan, Guanxi, and Guanbei. In the future, the Guanxi disciplinary officer, 9-fingered soul-chasing Wei Zhouduan, will be your immediate superior. He's an expert in the oneness of heaven and man realm. Below the disciplinary officers are the patrols. As the name suggests, they are in charge of patrolling the various prefectures, and cities to see if there are any martial arts factions or lone practitioners breaking the law and breaking the rules of the Guanzhong area. Also, the patrols are in charge of hunting down criminals and robbers. Their management is more comprehensive, and their own power is not small. Generally speaking, the number of patrols under each disciplinary officer is not fixed. Some have 5, 6, 7, 8, and sometimes even more than 10. Patrols are the backbone of the Guanzhong torture room. There are people like Brother Chu who are recommended by the disciplinary hall headquarters, but most of them are cultivated by the various disciplinary officers, so the number is not certain. Normally, the strength of a patrol is mostly in the 3-flower gathering realm or the 5-chi condensation realm. It is very rare for someone like Brother Chu to become a patrol with the strength of the physical invulnerability realm. Only during the years when the Guanzhong torture room was at its weakest, so Brother Chu was able to obtain such a position not only because of Hero Chu's recommendation, but also because of your ranking on the Longhu leaderboard. And below the patrols are the Jianghu constables that the people of the Jianghu are familiar with. Among them, those in the body tempering and blood condensation realms are ordinary constables. Only those in the innate, internal invulnerability, and physical invulnerability realms can be called Jianghu constables. Every Jianghu constables also have their own constables. Of course, there are some Jianghu constables who are more eccentric and don't like to lead so many new people, so they choose to work alone. Chu Xiu heard this and nodded. The position of a patrol was not low. No matter what, it was a person in charge of a region, and the power in his hands was not small. It was enough for Chu Xiu to use it to his fullest potential. Yuqi continued, "These are the basic structures of the Guanzhong torture room. In the disciplinary hall headquarters, there is a department called the Disciplinary Division, which is responsible for handling important matters. There are not many people, only a few hundred, and there are a few leaders among them. Their ranks are the same as the 4 disciplinary officers. There are no patrols under them, only ordinary secret agents, but there are different levels." Yuqi pointed to himself and said, "I am a 5th grade secret agent of the Disciplinary Division." Hearing Yuqi's words, Chu Xiu immediately understood what kind of place the Disciplinary Division was. This was where the elites of the entire Guanzhong torture room were located, and the power was directly under the jurisdiction of the Disciplinary Hall Master. "Thank you, Brother Yuqi, for telling me." Chu Xiu cupped his hands at Yuqi and said. Yuqi smiled and said, "You are welcome, Brother Chu. After all, you and I are colleagues now." As they spoke, Yuqi sent Chu Xiu back to his residence and let him rest for the night. Tomorrow, when he received Guan Xiyu's warrant, he would go to Guanxi. Looking at Yuqi's departing back, Chu Xiu's expression was calm. The Guanzhong torture room was indeed full of talents. Yuqi looked ordinary, but in reality, his strength was deeper than his. Moreover, he was a watertight person. He said what should be said, and he wouldn't say a word about what shouldn't be said. Along the way, Yuqi always had a smile on his face, but that smile didn't change at all. It was as if he was wearing a mask on his face, making it impossible to tell whether he was happy, angry, sad, or any other emotions. However, thinking about it, it was normal. After all, he was the disciple that Guan Xiyu had raised since he was young, and she still kept him by her side. If Yuqi didn't have any ability, he probably wouldn't have stayed by Guan Xiyu's side until now. At this moment, after Yuqi sent Chu Xiu off, he went straight to Guan Xiyu's study. "I've sent him back. How do you feel?" Guan Xiyu asked in a deep voice. Yuqi shook his head and said, "I can't tell. The other party is very cautious and didn't reveal anything wrong. However, I feel that this person is very shrewd." Guan Xiyu said plainly, "Those who aren't shrewd won't live long in the Blue Dragon Society, and they won't be able to make it onto the Longhu list. My Guanzhong torture room isn't afraid of people with shrewd ambitions. We're only afraid that some people who want to destroy the foundation of the Guanzhong torture room will mix in. In the future, just pay attention to his actions. If there's nothing unusual, don't report to me." Yuqi hurriedly said, "Yes, Master." But soon after, Yuqi said with some hesitation, "Master, the people of the outside world all say that you are fair and impartial, but this time, Great Hero Chu wants to do you a favor by making an exception and promoting a person who has just joined the torture chamber to be an inspector. This kind of action is somewhat inappropriate. He completely did not consider your reputation and thoughts." Guan Xiyu suddenly looked up, and an incomparably powerful aura burst out. This small study suddenly seemed to set off a storm, making it hard for people to breathe. Yuqi knelt on the ground and hurriedly said, "Master, I said all this for your own good." Guan Xiyu said coldly, "Of course I know you're doing this for my own good. Otherwise, do you think you can still stay by my side? I know what you mean, but you must remember that if it wasn't for Lord Chu Kuanga, I wouldn't have my current position, and there wouldn't be the glory of the Guanzhong torture room now. It's me in the Guanzhong torture room that owes Lord Chu Kuanga, not the other way around." Yuqi struggled under Guan Xiyu's powerful aura and said, "But you're the hall master of the Guanzhong torture room now. The glory of the Guanzhong torture room was also won by you. Chu Yuanqing isn't from the Guanzhong torture room at all, so what right does he have to speak in the Guanzhong torture room that's second only to you? Shut up. If you mention this kind of thing again in the future, then scram to hell and become a constable." Guan Xiyu looked at Yuqi coldly, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. Everyone had their own selfish motives, and Yuqi was no exception. He was Guan Xiyu's disciple, and Guan Xiyu's interests were his interests. When he was born, Chu Kuanga was already dead, so he didn't receive any favors from Chu Kuanga. Instead, in his eyes, Chu Yuanxing was damaging Guan Xiyu's interests and reputation by doing this. Today, Chu Yuanxing stuffed a person into the Guanzhong torture room, and tomorrow, another person. In the end, who did the Guanzhong torture room belong to? Chapter 148. Yuqi was considering Guan Xiyu's reputation and interests. As Guan Xiyu's personal disciple, Guan Xiyu's interests were his interests. That was why he had said those words today. However, he hadn't expected Guan Xiyu to be so sensitive about Chu Yuanxing's matters. His actions had angered his master. At that moment, the door to the study was pushed open, and a fragrant wind blew in. Mei Qinglian walked in and waved her hand. She looked at Yuqi and said, "Did you make Master angry again?" "Really?" As she spoke, Mei Qinglian walked behind Guan Xiyu and squeezed his shoulder. "All right, Master. Yuqi is still young after all." He didn't think before speaking. It's actually not a big deal. With Mei Qinglian's arrival, Guan Xiyu's terrifying aura vanished, allowing Yuqi to heave a sigh of relief. Mei Qinglian said to Yuqi, "Aren't you going to apologize to your master? Remember, Master naturally has his reasons for doing things. Why is a young man like you meddling in?" Yuqi immediately bowed to Guan Xiyu and said, "Master, this disciple was wrong. I won't dare to do it again." "Leave." Guan Xiyu waved her hand in annoyance and let Yuqi leave. Yuqi bowed to Mei Qinglian and said, "Thank you, Master's wife." Yuqi's attitude toward Mei Qinglian was even a little fearful. This woman was also his master's wife, but he didn't even dare to look at her. After Yuqi left, Guan Xiyu touched Mei Qinglian's hand behind her and sighed. "He's too selfish. Even Yuqi, the disciple I personally raised, now has selfish thoughts." Mei Qinglian hugged Guan Xiyu's neck and whispered in his ear, "Everyone has desires. Master, you can't control them even if you want to. Yuqi is still too young and can't see that far. The Guanzhong torture room is flourishing in your hands. No matter how famous the descendants of the Chu family are, they can't be more famous than you, Master. Even if you give the position to Chu Yuanxing now, he won't dare to take it. Yuqi, you're worrying for nothing." Glancing at the pile of documents on the table, Mei Qinglian softly said, "Let's deal with these tomorrow. This servant has stewed chicken soup. Master should rest early after eating." Guan Xiyu patted Mei Qinglian's hand and said with a smile, "Madam still cares about me. All right, I'll deal with it tomorrow." If others saw Guan Xiyu's current appearance, they would surely be greatly shocked. This was because Guan Xiyu usually gave people the impression that she was impartial, even to the point of being unreasonable. Most of the warriors in the Guanzhong torture room had never seen Guan Xiyu smile. Moreover, Guan Xiyu was also a person with extreme self-discipline. She had strict rules for her daily cultivation time and official business time. She could do more, but she couldn't do less. She casually pushed what needed to be done today to tomorrow. This was not something that Guan Xiyu would do. The next morning, Yuqi arrived at Chu Xiu's residence early in the morning, preparing to follow Chu Xiu to Yanxi. At this moment, Yuqi's expression didn't change at all. He still wore a faint smile on his face, as if he wasn't the person who had been scolded by Guan Xiyu to the point of breaking out in a cold sweat. The area of Guanzhong was very large, even larger than the northern Yan region of Yanxi. From Guanzhong to Guanxi, Chu Xiu and Yuqi walked for a full 7 days. The Guanxi torture chamber branch was in Zhohua City. It was also a small city, but it was also abnormally prosperous. Guanxi was close to West Chu, and Zhohua City was the center of Guanxi. Merchants from West Chu conducted business here. As soon as they entered the city, Chu Xiu could feel a bustling atmosphere. Yuqi said, "There are many merchants from West Chu in Guanxi, so there are many West Chu products that are extremely rare in the outside world. Brother Chu, you can come and take a look when you have time. Before I came, I already sent a message to Lord Wei Jiuduan, the Guanxi torture chamber branch. He should be waiting for you in the Guanxi torture chamber branch. Let's go directly to the torture chamber." Chu Xiu nodded and followed Yuqi to the Guanxi torture chamber branch. The Guanxi torture chamber branch was basically a smaller version of the Guanzhong torture room. However, the signboard was ordinary black iron with the words, "Guanxi torture chamber branch," written on it. As soon as they entered the torture chamber, a few constables greeted them at the door.
One of them said, "Lord Yuchi, Lord Wei is already waiting inside."
Yuchi nodded and followed Chu Xiao into the meeting hall. There were 6 people in the meeting hall, and one of them was sitting in the main seat. He looked like a skinny old man dressed in black. His hair was already white, but he had an imposing aura about him. The old man's eyes were sharp, and he was playing with 2 iron balls carved with golden dragon patterns. The most eye-catching thing about him was that he only had 4 fingers on his right hand. This person was Chu Xiao's future boss, the Guanxi torture chamber's 9-finger soul chasing Wei Zhouduan.
He was a great master in the unity of heaven and man realm, but he didn't give Chu Xiao the feeling that he was as strong as the heavenly Sin branch leader.
There were 5 people sitting below Wei Zhouduan. They were all inspectors under Wei Zhouduan's command. Some of them had reached the level of 3 flowers at one's prominence, while others had even stepped into the 5 cheese origin realm. At that moment, all 5 of them were also sizing up Chu Xiao. Yuchi cupped his hands at Wei Zhouduan and said, "Greetings, Master Wei." Wei Zhouduan smiled and said, "Yuchi, you don't have to be so polite. I have already received the news from the torture chamber headquarters." Although Wei Zhouduan's strength and status were much higher than Yuchi's, his attitude toward Yuchi was very kind. Everyone in the Guanzhong torture room knew that Yuchi was Guan Siyu's direct disciple, and he was the kind who was raised from a young age. Although the next head of the Guanzhong torture room didn't necessarily have to be the direct disciple of the previous head, Yuchi was definitely someone who the torture chamber focused on training. Coupled with his identity as Guan Siyu's direct disciple, Wei Zhouduan's attitude toward him was very polite. Yuchi pointed at Chu Xiao beside him and said, "This is Chu Xiao. He was assigned by my master to be an inspector under Master Wei. He was personally recommended by Master Chu Yuanxing, so he can be considered a distant relative of Master Chu. It just so happens that one of your inspectors has just died, so the torture chamber headquarters has added another one for you." Chu Xiao walked out and cupped his hands. "Greetings, Master Wei." At this moment, Wei Zhouduan and the others all turned to look at Chu Xiao, sizing him up. In the beginning, Wei Zhouduan didn't take this matter seriously. It was a good thing for him that the higher-ups were giving him more manpower. In the past few years, the strength of his Guanxi torture chamber branch had been getting weaker and weaker. There were only 5 inspectors left, and the strongest of the 4 torture chambers, the Guangdong torture chamber, had 16 inspectors. Wei Zhouduan couldn't even compare to a fraction of that number. But now that he saw that Chu Xiao was only in the physical invulnerability realm, Wei Zhouduan was a little dissatisfied. How many years had it been since someone in the physical invulnerability realm could become an inspector? Although his Guanxi torture chamber branch was weak, it wasn't a problem to find dozens of physical invulnerability realm martial artists. This way, he could have dozens of inspectors under him. But now that he heard Yuchi say that this Chu Xiao was recommended by Chu Yuanxing and could be considered a distant relative of the Chu family, Wei Zhouduan was relieved and didn't say anything more. He knew Chu Yuanxing's position in the Guanzhong torture room. Even he himself was a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room. He had experienced the period when Chu Kuanga was in charge of the Guanzhong torture room. If Chu Yuanxing came looking for him directly and asked Chu Xiao to become an inspector under him, Wei Zhouduan might be in a difficult position.
But since it was an order from the Hall Master, there was nothing more to say.
So Wei Zhouduan directly said to Chu Xiao, "Not bad. The person recommended by Hero Chu is definitely not wrong. Go and sit at the side." Wei Zhouduan didn't say anything, but the other 5 inspectors didn't feel comfortable. The 5 of them were all veterans of the Guanzhong torture hall. They had started from the lowest level of Jianghu constables and were promoted to Jianghu constables. Finally, after accumulating merits and strength, they were able to become patrol envoys. But why did Chu Xiao become an inspector the moment he arrived? Most importantly, he was only in the physical invulnerability realm, the same as the constables under him. But now, he was on equal footing with them. Why? In the Jianghu, it was common to judge one's strength based on strength. It was the same for Chu Xiao when he was in the Blue Dragon Society. Before he showed his strength, the people in the Blue Dragon Society weren't friendly. But the environment of the Guanzhong torture room was much more complicated than that of the Blue Dragon Society. In the Guanzhong torture room, not only did you have strength, but you also had to have experience. But now, Chu Xiao had nothing. He entered through the back door. Of course, this made the others unhappy. Chu Xiao didn't care about these things. Instead, he was confused about what Yuqi said just now. Just now, Yuqi emphasized that he relied on Chu Yuanxing to enter the Guanzhong torture room. What did he mean? Was he afraid that the others didn't know that this was just a simple explanation? Or was there some deeper meaning? But Yuqi's attitude was too well hidden. Chu Xiao couldn't see through his thoughts. Yuqi took out the warrant and handed it to Wei Zhuduan, saying, "Lord Wei, I've brought the leader and the people. I have to report back to the main hall." Wei Zhuduan smiled and said, "Hallmaster still needs you to help with some chores. You're very busy, so I won't keep you. Send my regards to Hallmaster." Yuqi smiled and immediately turned to leave. After Yuqi left, Wei Zhuduan looked at Chu Xiao and said in a deep voice, "Chu Xiao, since Hallmaster arranged for you to be a patrol, it means that Hallmaster thinks highly of you. I also hope that you won't disappoint Hallmaster. My previous patrol, Fang Zhengyuan, died in an accident. His subordinates and the area he was in charge of will be handed over to you. You only need to remember one thing. The Guanzhong torture room has its own rules. There are rules in the open and in the dark. If you break the rules, even if you were recommended to the torture hall by Hero Chu, you won't be let off lightly." Chapter 149. Wei Zhuduan's words were as good as not saying anything at all. If anyone broke the rules, Guan Siyu wouldn't spare them even if he didn't say anything. But who had the final say in the secret rules? However, Chu Xiao had just arrived, so whatever his superior said was naturally the law. Therefore, Chu Xiao didn't refute at all. He cupped his hands and said, "As you command, sir." Seeing Chu Xiao's attitude, Wei Zhuduan nodded in satisfaction. He was afraid that Chu Xiao wouldn't know his position because he was recommended by Chu Yuanxing. Now it seemed that he knew his place. Chu Yuanxing's position in the Guanzhong torture room was indeed very high. Because he was Chu Kuang's son, everyone was willing to give him face and give him the courtesy he deserved. But at the same time, if Chu Yuanxing interfered too much with the power of the Guanzhong torture room, a powerful torturer like Wei Zhuduan would be dissatisfied. Wei Zhuduan said to the other 5 torturers, "From now on, Chu Xiao will be your colleague, especially Wei Hanzhan and Jiang Taoran. Your territories are next to Chu Xiao's, so you should help each other out." Among the two, Jiang Taoran was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He had the strength of the Three-Flower Realm. Hearing this, he smiled at Chu Xiao, cupped his hands and said, "Brother Chu, you and I will be colleagues from now on." Chu Xiao also stood up and cupped his hands in return. As for Wei Hanzhan, he looked much younger. He only looked to be in his 30s and also had the strength of the Three-Flower Realm. However, he had entered this realm much earlier than Jiang Taoran. In reality, he was already over 40 years old, but he looked relatively young. Facing Chu Xiao, Wei Hanzhan was much more casual. He only cupped his hands and called him Brother Chu. He didn't care about his reputation. He did not treat a physical invulnerability martial artist who entered through the back door as an equal. Wei Zhuduan coughed and said, "All right, that's all for today. All of you can return to your respective patrolling areas. Chu Xiao, after you go to the back hall to collect your clothes and the patrol envoy's token, you can take up your post." Chu Xiao cupped his hands and left with the other inspectors. The others did not have any intention of talking to Chu Xiao. Although there was no conflict of interest between them, it was clear that Chu Xiao was not qualified to be acknowledged by them with his background and strength. After collecting his clothes and waist tag, Chu Xiao left the Guanxi headquarters and headed to Zhenzhou City in Zhenzhou Prefecture. Guanxi was not as vast as northern Yan, so it was not divided into prefectures. It was only roughly divided into several prefectures. Zhenzhou Prefecture under the jurisdiction of Guanxi was one of them. Zhenzhou City was the center of Zhenzhou Prefecture, and there were more than 10 small cities around it that were also under the jurisdiction of Zhenzhou Prefecture. At this moment, the door of the patrol hall was tightly shut. 4 physical invulnerability Jianghu constables sat there in silence. The 4 of them were the strongest constables in the Zhenzhou patrol hall. After the death of the previous patrol envoy, all the constables and constables were under their control. One of them, a man in his 40s with a red knife scar on his face, laughed and said, "Everyone, don't be so quiet. The branch has already sent the news that the new patrol envoy will be taking up his post soon. We should discuss what to do, right? Opposite him was a constable in his 50s.
He wiped the long knife in his hand and said calmly, "What is there to discuss?
Since the higher-ups have sent an important person, we should continue to follow orders. Otherwise, what do you want to do? Wu Siping, I know you are ambitious, but you can't really think that the higher-ups will let you be the patrol envoy, right? The Guanzhong torture room is not the same as it was in the past. There are many capable people. Even if Lord Feng Zhengyuan is dead, the new patrol envoy will not be a physical invulnerability martial artist like you. There are countless mighty ones in the sentencing bureau. Any one of them can be the patrol envoy." Wu Siping snorted coldly and said, "Du Guangzhong, don't interrupt me. You know that's not what I'm talking about. During this period of time, there has been no patrol envoy, so we have only paid 60% of the taxes. The remaining 40% is split among us. Although I was the one who suggested this, the three of you have also taken it. Now that the new patrol envoy is here, this matter must not be leaked. Also, should we pay all the taxes or continue to hold it back?" The Guanzhong torture room was in between the Jianghu and the imperial court. Although it did not belong to any of the three countries, it still had all kinds of taxes. In particular, Guanzhong was originally the center of the three countries. The trade was unusually prosperous, and the taxes were a big part of the development of the Guanzhong torture room. Normally, the taxes would be collected by the lowest-ranking Jianghu constables and handed over to the patrol envoy. The patrol envoy would then hand it over to the torture chamber branch, and finally the branch would hand it over to the main hall. The main hall would hold back a portion of the taxes, and the rest would be distributed equally to the three countries. Therefore, in theory, the lowest-ranking Jianghu constables and patrol envoys were not allowed to hold back any of the taxes. All of them had to be handed over to the main hall, and the main hall would then distribute their salaries and cultivation resources according to their rank. Although this was a little troublesome, it could ensure that the Guanzhong torture room was fair and just. Now, the four of them actually dared to secretly hold back the taxes. This was a huge taboo. Du Guangzhong's hand that was wiping his long saber stopped abruptly. He said in a low voice, "Are you crazy? When there's no one watching over us, we can play some tricks on the books. Now that the higher-ups have sent a patrol envoy, you still dare to do this? Are you tired of living?" Wu Siping said coldly, "Old Du, you are too timid. Look at the other patrol envoys. Which one of them doesn't have some gray income? It's only that stubborn Feng Zhengyuan who doesn't know how to be flexible. Even the rest of us are poor. I used to have a sworn brother who works in the torture chamber's headquarters. Yesterday, he sent someone to tell me that the new patrol envoy is not a Jianghu constable. He was recommended by the Guanzhong hero Chu Yuanxing. He has never stayed in the Guanzhong torture room at all. He's just an outsider. The four of us working together, as long as we handle things on the surface, won't we be able to change the accounts in the dark? As long as we work together, it won't be a problem to make the other party a mere figurehead. An outsider becomes the patrol envoy of the Guanzhong torture room. He has no experience at all. Does he really think it's so easy to mingle in the Guanzhong torture room?" Du Guangzhong was still a little hesitant. "But, no buts." Wu Siping directly interrupted his words. He turned his gaze to the other two and said, "Qin Feng Lu Qingli, what do you think?" The other two thought for a while and gritted their teeth. "Let's do it." If the new patrol envoy was a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room, they might not dare to play such tricks. But since it was an outsider who had never stayed in the Guanzhong torture room, they had some confidence. Wu Siping turned his gaze to Du Guangzhong and sneered, "Old Du, the four of us are one. If you don't agree to this, you'll be cutting off our source of income. You know the consequences. Don't forget how Lord Feng died. The current Guanzhong torture room is not the previous Guanzhong torture room." Listening to Wu Siping's words with some killing intent, Du Guangzhong's expression changed slightly. Du Guangzhong was a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room. His father was the Jianghu arrestor of the Guanzhong torture room. Wu Siping was a lone robber who killed people like scything flax when he was young. After he was caught by the Jianghu arrestor of the Guanzhong torture room, he was willing to repent and chose to join the Guanzhong torture room to serve them. Du Guangzhong didn't know whether he had really repented after so many years, but his ferocity didn't change much. And just like what Wu Siping said, The current Guanzhong torture room was not the previous Guanzhong torture room. As a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room, he felt it the most. Under the intense gaze of Wu Siping and the other two, Du Guangzhong could only nod with difficulty. At that moment, someone knocked on the door.
A martial artist entered and said, "Sir, the new inspector has entered the city." Wu Siping grinned and said, "Let's go and welcome the new sir."
The three of you, remember to have a good attitude. After all, this sir has a backer.
After the previous inspector, Fang Zhengyuan, passed away, the power of the entire inspector hall was in the hands of the four of them.
Just like what Wu Siping said before, it was easy for the three of them to make the new inspector a figurehead. However, he wouldn't play such a low-level trick like putting him in his place. The Guanzhong torture room had its own rules. After all, the new inspector was inspector, while they were just Jianghu arresters. Being one rank higher than them could crush others, so they couldn't afford to lose face. In Zhenzhou City, Chu Xiu rode a purplish-red horse and wore the black warrior attire of the Guanzhong torture room. On the left was a sword and saber symbol, just like the one erected at the entrance of the Guanzhong torture room. This also represented Chu Xiu's identity as an inspector. The disciplinary officers like Wei Jiuduan, who were in charge of an area, also wore such attire.
However, the symbol of the sword and saber was on the right because the right was respected.
This meant that their position was higher than that of the inspector. On the other hand, the symbol of the sword and saber in front of the disciplinary officer's chest was red. They were slightly different from the other Guanzhong torture room martial artists. However, existences at Wei Jiuduan's level could wear anything they wanted. As the pinnacle of power in the Guanzhong torture room, other than Guan Siyu, who was Guanzhong torture room chief, who didn't know them, Chu Xiu didn't ask where the inspector's hall was. The reason was simple. As the ruler of Guanzhong, the inspector's hall would definitely be in the center of the city. As expected, when Chu Xiu arrived at the inspector's hall, 4 physical invulnerability inspectors were already waiting for him. Seeing the sword and saber symbol embroidered on Chu Xiu's attire, Wu Siping and the other 3 bowed to Chu Xiu in unison and said, "Greetings, sir." Chu Xiu jumped off the horse and said, "There's no need to be so polite. Are you the Jianghu constables mentioned by the inspector's hall?" Wu Siping was about to answer, but when he felt the aura on Chu Xiu, he was stunned. Du Guangzhong and the others were the same. Physical invulnerability? The new inspector was actually only in the physical invulnerability stage. What kind of joke was this? Chapter 150. When Wu Siping and the others saw that Chu Xiu was young, they didn't pay much attention. There were 5 tiers of qi-controlling realm. Among them, the inner and outer invulnerability were 1 tier of experience. The 3 flowers at one's prominence and 5 qis collecting were another. And the oneness of heaven and man was another. A big realm included 3 experiences and 5 small realms. When a martial artist stepped into the 3 flowers at one's prominence realm, the essence, qi, and spirit in the body would be unified and reach the extreme. After condensing the 3 flowers at one's prominence, one's lifespan would be greatly increased, and one would be able to slow down aging. Therefore, the younger a martial artist was when they stepped into the 3 flowers at one's prominence realm, the younger they would look in the future. Sometimes, 2 martial artists of the same age and the same realm would look like a young man and a middle-aged man. That was because the 2 of them were at different ages when they stepped into the 3 flowers at one's prominence realm. Therefore, when they first saw Chu Xiu, they subconsciously thought that Chu Xiu had stepped into the 3 flowers at one's prominence very early, which was why he looked young. However, when they got off the horse and got closer, they felt the aura on Chu Xiu's body. This guy didn't step into the 3 flowers at one's prominence early at all. His good friend at the main hall only told him that the new inspector was an outsider, but he didn't tell him that the new inspector was only in the physical invulnerability realm. This discovery immediately made Wu Siping feel very sullen, and he even felt a bit unwilling and resentful. Just now, Du Guangzhong told him that even if the previous inspector, Fang Zhengyuan, died, the torture chamber wouldn't let him be the inspector because he was only in the physical invulnerability realm. However, as soon as he said this, the higher-up sent a martial artist in the physical invulnerability realm to be the inspector. He had no experience in the Guanzhong torture room and had no qualifications. Just because he was recommended to the torture chamber by the Guanzhong hero Chu Yuanxing, he could become an inspector in 1 step? Wu Saiping felt very unfair and very dissatisfied. When Chu Xiu saw the expressions of Wu Saiping and the others, he could roughly guess what they were thinking. Chu Xiu just said calmly, "Everyone, is there a problem?" Wu Saiping suppressed the emotions in his heart and cupped his hands towards Chu Xiu. "Of course there's no problem. Please come in, sir." Chu Xiu and Wu Saiping entered the meeting hall and sat on the host's seat. Chu Xiu took out his order and handed it to the four people and said, "This one is Chu Xiu. From today onwards, I will take over the position of patrol envoy. This is the order signed by Hall Leader Guan and Lord Wei. You can take a look." Wu Saiping smiled and said, "How can this thing be fake?" Subordinate Wu Saiping greets sir. With that, Wu Saiping stood up and bowed to Chu Xiu. The other three also stood up and said in unison, "Subordinates Du Guangzhong, Lu Qingli, and Qin Feng greet sir." Chu Xiu nodded and said, "You don't have to be so polite. I'm also new here, so I still need the help of a few veteran detectives." Du Guangzhong and the others looked at each other. This new patrol envoy seemed to be very easy to talk to. Although he was young, he didn't appear to be that overbearing. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "But because I'm new here, I don't know much about the information of the places under my command. As far as I know, the patrol envoy is mainly responsible for the daily activities of the territory under their command. Is there anything unusual during this period?" Wu Saiping shook his head and said, "Everything is calm, there's nothing unusual." Chu Xiu's eyes narrowed when he heard that. There wasn't a patrol inspector overseeing the territory for a month, and there are a few cities around the trade route. You're telling me that there weren't any abnormalities during this period? Wu Saiping said lightly, "Nothing means nothing. This should be a good thing. Does sir want something to happen in our territory?" Du Guangzhong and the other two looked at Wu Saiping in surprise. Just now the person who said that he wouldn't put the new patrol envoy in his place was Wu Saiping, but now Wu Saiping seemed to be at odds with this Sir Chu Xiu, which confused them. In fact, Wu Saiping's thinking was very simple. If the new patrol envoy had the cultivation of the three-flower realm at one's prominence, then he would naturally have to keep a low profile and play some tricks in the dark. However, the other party was only at the physical invulnerability stage, which made him a little dissatisfied. At the same time, he also felt a little more confident. In his opinion, this new patrol envoy was just someone who got his position because of Chu Yuanqing's recommendation. Wu Saiping wasn't afraid of the other party at all. Although Chu Yuanqing's status in the Guangzhong torture room was high, he still couldn't interfere with the specific affairs of the torture chamber. That would break the rules of the torture chamber and cause some people in the torture chamber to be dissatisfied. In the past, it was one thing for Chu Yuanqing to plant people in the Guangzhong torture room. Most of the time, he did it unintentionally and with good intentions. However, if those people suffered any grievances in the torture chamber and went to Chu Yuanqing to stand up for them, then would the Guangzhong torture room belong to him, Chu Yuanqing, or Guan Siyu? Although Chu Yuanqing was a little naive, he at least knew when to advance and when to retreat. He would never interfere in such things. Putting aside his identity as Chu Yuanqing, Wu Saiping didn't think he was inferior to the other party at all. Chu Xiu looked at Wu Saiping for a while, then turned his head to Du Guangzhong and the others and said, "The territory under your jurisdiction is also peaceful?" The three of them hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The four of them had a common weakness in each other's hands. Moreover, they had already reached an agreement just now. Now, they would naturally suffer together. Seeing this scene, a cold light flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes. As a superior, it was actually not a good thing for his subordinates to be too united. This was because it would easily lead to deceiving his superiors and subordinates. In the past, because Chu Xiu was too close to the Ghost Hand King and the others, the Heavenly Sin Branch leader tried to sow discord between them. Unfortunately, he failed in the end. This was because his methods weren't brilliant, and Chu Xiu and the Ghost Hand King weren't idiots. They didn't expose this matter, but they still had a certain sense of distance when doing things. It was very ironic now that Chu Xiu actually encountered such a situation. However, this time, he was the superior, and his subordinates were even more ruthless. They actually dared to unite in front of him to undermine him. Were the constables of the Guangzhong torture room so bold? However, at this time, Chu Xiu didn't flare up. He just said lightly, "It's good that it's peaceful. It means that my work in the future will be very easy. All right, all of you can leave. Seeing Chu Xiu's attitude, Wu Siping couldn't help but smile.
He cupped his hands at Chu Xiu and said, "Then I'll take my leave."
He had already expected this scene. There were only 3 reactions from Chu Xiu. The first one was to turn hostile on the spot, but that would be embarrassing himself. Anyway, Wu Siping and the others had done enough to save face. What else did Chu Xiu want? The second one was to use his status to oppress others, but it was also useless. They were all veterans of the Guanzhong torture room. It wasn't easy to deal with the constables of the physical invulnerability realm. At least, Chu Xiu didn't have the qualifications to do so. They had to report to the Guanxi torture room branch. Only when they had enough evidence could they take action against him. Not to mention that they couldn't find fault with their attitude. Even if they scolded Chu Xiu, it still wouldn't be a crime worthy of death. At most, they would be transferred away from Chu Xiu's subordinates. Anyway, they had taken what they should take. Even if they were transferred away, they would still be constables in the Jianzhong torture room. On the other hand, Chu Xiu would leave Wei Jiuduan with the impression that he was incompetent and couldn't even manage his own subordinates. As for the last one, it was to act as if nothing had happened and bear with it. After exiting the inspector hall, Du Guangzhong said in a low voice, "Didn't we go too far today?" Wu Siping sneered and said, "Too far? We just wanted to let this young inspector know the reality. That is, who is in charge here. He didn't make things difficult for us. We helped him handle the matters in the territory properly. All he needed to do was sit there and wait for the credit to fall into his hands. If he really doesn't know what's good for him, then we will make him suffer for a while. That way, he will know that the waters of the Guanzhong torture room are deep. You all saw the inspector's attitude today. He isn't an idiot. He knows to bear with it. What are you all worried about?" Du Guangzhong and the others nodded. They felt that what Wu Siping said made sense. It was a pity that they didn't understand Chu Xiu. Under normal circumstances, Chu Xiu could indeed bear with it. However, there was a knife above the word, bear. After he had endured, it was usually to make the knife stronger and sharper. After nightfall, Chu Xiu stayed in the inspector hall. Of course, Chu Xiu could also buy a big house outside. After all, the Guanzhong torture room didn't require torturers and inspectors to stay in the branch and hall. A blood condensation realm constable on night duty brought Chu Xiu to his residence. After arranging some daily necessities, he was about to leave in a hurry. If it was under normal circumstances, a small constable like him would definitely take the opportunity to curry favor with a new inspector. However, he didn't dare to do so now. The inspector hall was only so big. All the constables who came and went knew that the new inspector was only in the physical invulnerability realm. Moreover, he was an outsider. Not only did he fail to control the situation, but he was also captured by Sir Wu Siping. Although it was rumored that this inspector had suffered in front of a few constables, he wasn't someone a small constable like him could afford to offend. Therefore, his attitude was still respectful. However, he didn't dare to speak too much to the new inspector. Otherwise, what would happen if Sir Wu Siping and the others found out? He was just an ordinary small constable. At this moment, he had already made up his mind. He wouldn't offend either side, nor would he curry favor with either. The battle between the big shots had nothing to do with a small fry like him. However, this was how things were. What one feared would happen. Just as the small constable was about to leave, he heard Chu Xiu say softly, "Don't be in a hurry to leave. I have something to ask you." Chapter 151. Hearing Chu Xiu's voice, the young constable put on a long face and said, "Sir, I really don't know anything." Chu Xiu said, "You know what I want to ask you, so you say you don't know anything?" The young constable said helplessly, "Sir, I can't afford to offend you and Sir Wu Siping. Why do you have to make things difficult for a small fry like me?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Since you know you can't afford to offend me, why waste your breath? Wu Siping isn't here now, but I'm right in front of you. Close the door. Don't worry, I won't leak anything you say. Of course, if you don't say anything, then you're offending me." The little constable was dumbfounded. The lord in front of him was clearly unreasonable. What could he do?
Therefore, the young constable could only close the door obediently. He said helplessly, "Sir, please ask whatever you want to ask."
However, I've only joined the Guanzhong torture room for a few years. I've only joined Sir Fang a few months ago. Therefore, I don't know much. Chu Xiu said, "Don't worry, I won't ask you anything that will make things difficult for you. However, you'd better not play any tricks. You're not the only one on duty in the patrol hall. I'll ask the others what I got from you. If the two of you say different things, you know the consequences." The young constable was speechless. Although this new sir was young, he was very scheming. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to play any tricks in front of him. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, "Don't be nervous. What I'm asking is not a secret." Wu Siping and the other physical invulnerability Jianghu constables, what's their background and their relationship with each other? Hearing Chu Xiu's question, the young constable heaved a sigh of relief. Almost everyone in the patrol hall knew about this. It was indeed not a secret. Even though the door was closed, the constable still lowered his voice and said, "Among the 4 constables, Lord Du Guangzhong is a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room. He has been a constable in the Guanzhong torture room since his father's generation. When Wu Siping was young, he was said to have been a great bandit of the Jianghu. His methods were ruthless and he killed people like flies. In the end, he was captured by the punishment hall when he acted in Guanzhong. Instead, he chose to serve the punishment hall. As for Mr. Lu Qingli and Mr. Qin Fang, their family background was very ordinary. They were all ordinary people in Guanzhong. When they were young, they were selected to be trained in Guanzhong torture room because of their good talent. They started from the lowest level of arrestor and became Jianghu arresters now. As for their relationship, this subordinate can't say. However, Sir Wu Siping is the strongest, and he is usually very forthright with his subordinates, so he is loved and respected by everyone. Lord Du Guangzhong couldn't stand Sir Wu Siping's Jianghu aura, so both sides didn't see eye to eye. They had quarreled before, but there was no conflict. As for Mr. Lu Qingli and Mr. Qin Fang, they have been in the Guanzhong torture room for so many years and have their own loyal subordinates. They usually don't get too close to anyone, nor do they have any conflict with anyone. Chu Xiu rubbed his chin. Previously, the 4 people's attitude was obviously that they had joined forces to control him, and even wanted to make him a mere figurehead. However, listening to the young constable's words, the 4 people's relationship wasn't that good before. It could only be said that it wasn't too bad. However, now that he had arrived, the 4 of them were all targeting him. This was very strange. There must be a reason for them to do this. It could be for benefits, or it could be a common threat. However, Chu Xiu didn't consider this point. He only said to the young constable, "All right, you can go." Hearing Chu Xiu's order, the young constable then left as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. In the morning of the next day, Chu Xiu sat alone in the inspector's hall. However, he sat there for a whole day without doing anything. Of course, the Guanzhong torture room wouldn't be so idle. However, the structure of the Guanzhong torture room was from the bottom to the top. The constable at the lowest level patrolled the area. Once they found something, they had to report it to the Jianghu constable above them. If the Jianghu constable could solve it, they would solve it themselves. If they couldn't, they had to inform the inspector above them. Normally, even if the Jianghu constable solved the problem by themselves, they had to report it to the inspector above them. However, Wu Siping intercepted all the news from below and dealt with it himself. He wouldn't report it to Chu Xiu at all. If Chu Xiu asked, all he had to do was say that it was peaceful. What could Chu Xiu do to him? The 4 of them had been in the inspector's hall for at least 10 years. Their prestige was deeply rooted. As long as they didn't say anything, it was impossible for Chu Xiu to bypass them and directly command the lower-level constables. In other words, they wanted to make Chu Xiu a figurehead. An inspector was still an inspector, just that he didn't have any real power. At this time, in a room at the inspector's hall, Wu Siping and the other 3 were all there. There were some dishes and wine in front of them. They looked very relaxed. Every Jianghu constable had an office in the inspector's hall. This place was Wu Siping's office and study. However, at this time, he treated it as a tavern. Du Guangzhong held a wine glass and said, "Aren't we going a little overboard by doing this?" Wu Siping smiled disdainfully and said, Old Du, you're a little too timid. It's not like the Guanzhong torture room has never had an inspector who was just a figurehead over the years. You're not capable enough, so who can you blame? This Chu Xiao isn't even Hall Leader Guan's disciple.
What's there to be afraid of?
Du Guangzhong frowned and said, I'm not talking about that. After all, Chu Xiao joined the Guanzhong torture room because of Great Hero Chu. If we do this, aren't we not giving Great Hero Chu face? Wu Siping squinted his eyes and said, Old Du, don't talk so much nonsense. You should know who's in charge of the Guanzhong torture room now. Great Hero Chu also knows his limits. Why can't the person he recommended be just a figurehead? All these years, Great Hero Chu has recommended many people to the Guanzhong torture room. Have you seen who he has ever cared about? Great Hero Chu knows what he's doing. And Old Du, since you've already done it, there's no turning back. You've already collected all the taxes that should have been paid. Yesterday, you also offended the inspector. Why do you want to turn back now? It's too late. Du Guangzhong snorted coldly and said, Who said I regret it? I'm just telling you to be careful. Don't be too arrogant and make things worse. If you really fall out with him, it won't do anyone any good. Although he said so, Du Guangzhong was secretly shaking his head. The Guanzhong torture room had really changed a lot over the years. When he had just joined the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Kuanga was still the hall master. At that time, the Guanzhong torture room was definitely not like this. But now, the power of the Guanzhong torture room was several times or even 10 times stronger than before. However, the internal situation had changed a lot. People like Wu Siping who joined later no longer had much memory and respect for Great Hero Chu. Opposite him, Wu Siping chuckled and said, It's good that you don't regret it. Come, let's drink. Just as he was about to raise his glass, someone suddenly knocked on the door. A constable walked in and said, Sirs, the inspector wants to invite Sir Du Guangzhong over. Wu Siping frowned and said, He wants to invite Old Du over alone? The constable nodded. Du Guangzhong was also puzzled and said, Why does he want to invite me over? Wu Siping waved his hand casually and said, I think it's a little tricky to deal with the 4 of us together, so he wants to take us down one by one. Old Du, you just have to control yourself. Say what you should and don't say what you shouldn't. Anyway, just be respectful and say a few perfunctory words. Du Guangzhong nodded in puzzlement. Although he did not understand why Chu Xiao would invite him first, he still followed the constable out. After he left, Qin Fong frowned and said, There won't be any problems, right? Wu Siping said indifferently, Don't worry. Old Du is usually a little overcautious, but it's not for nothing that he could survive in the Guanzhong torture room for so many years. He knows what to say and what not to say. When he comes back, I'll ask Chu Xiao what he said to him. I don't think there's anything new. Come, let's continue drinking. At that moment, Du Guangzhong came to Chu Xiao's study and knocked on the door. Official Chu, I'm here.
Come in.
Chu Xiao's voice came from inside the room. When Du Guangzhong pushed the door open and entered, he found Chu Xiao sitting in the study, wiping his crimson, extremely magnificent long saber. Close the door and sit down, Chu Xiao said without raising his head. Du Guangzhong was slightly puzzled. He thought that Chu Xiao was pretending to be profound, so he closed the door and sat down, ready to see what tricks Chu Xiao was playing. As a result, he sat there for a full hour, but Chu Xiao was still wiping his red sleeve saber. He even rubbed the saber until it was bright red and could be used as a mirror, but he still did not say a word. Du Guangzhong could not stand it anymore. He couldn't help but say, What does official Chu want from me? If there's nothing else, I'll leave. There are still many things that I need to deal with in the inspector hall. Hearing that, Chu Xiao raised his head and said slowly, Constable Du, are you in a hurry? Don't worry, it will be done soon. After that, Chu Xiao lowered his head and wiped the red sleeve saber in his hand again. This time, he actually wiped it for another hour. Until Du Guangzhong really could not stand it anymore, Chu Xiao took the initiative to say, I heard that Constable Du also uses a saber? Du Guangzhong was suddenly stunned and subconsciously said, Yes. What do you think about sabers, Constable Du? Chu Xiao suddenly asked. Du Guangzhong was stunned. He did not know what Chu Xiao meant by this question. He had to perfunctorily say, "It's a weapon. I've been practicing it since I was a child. What else can I think about it?" Chu Xiao put the red sleeve saber in his hand on the table and said in a deep voice, "Weapons also have a spirit. After being nourished, the wizard weapon above the 7th transformation will have a spirit. This spirit is not given by the heaven and earth, but by the user. The sword is the leader of all weapons. It can be yin or yang, and it has thousands of changes. The saber is the king of all weapons. It has the aura of a king and is domineering. It is incomparably sharp and moves forward. This is my view on saber." Chapter 152. Du Guangzhong found Chu Xiao's explanation of the saber novel. Although he was an old man in the Guangzhong torture room, his father and grandfather's generation were just ordinary low-level constables. They didn't even have a physical invulnerability expert. His generation was already the strongest in the Du family. A martial artist of this level could only be considered decent in the underworld. It could be said that he had just stepped into the threshold of martial arts. His understanding of martial arts was very rough. To them, a saber was a saber. What else could it be? After listening to Chu Xiao's words, Du Guangzhong seemed to have understood something. He even pondered for a while. But then Du Guangzhong came to his senses. Why did he come here? He couldn't help but ask Chu Xiao, "Official Chu, it's been 2 hours. What do you want? You can't just talk about sabers and swords with me, right?" Chu Xiao waved his hand and said, "It's fine. You can leave now." Chu Xiao's words stunned Du Guangzhong. Then, a trace of anger appeared in his eyes. If Chu Xiao wasn't an inspector, he would have fallen out with him long ago. He found me, sat with me for 2 hours, and asked me to leave after saying a few words. What is this? Is he messing with me? Du Guangzhong snorted and turned to leave in dissatisfaction. But at the moment when Du Guangzhong turned around, Chu Xiao sheathed his saber. The sharpness in his eyes was not inferior to the red sleeve saber that he polished. At this time, in Wu Saiping's room, Wu Saiping and the other two were waiting anxiously. Previously, they thought that Du Guangzhong was just pretending to be courteous with Chu Xiao and would come out soon. But it had been 2 hours. What were they talking about? Even if they were pretending to be courteous, it wouldn't take so long. Wu Saiping sent his confidant to check, but it was useless. The door of Chu Xiao's study was closed. He couldn't hear anything at all. This made Wu Saiping a little confused. At this time, Du Guangzhong came back. Wu Saiping said quickly, "Old Du, what did Chu Xiao say to you?" Du Guangzhong said subconsciously, "Nothing." As soon as he said this, Wu Saiping, Lu Qingli and Qin Fang's gazes changed. Chu Xiao had called him into the study for an hour, but now Du Guangzhong said that Chu Xiao didn't say anything. It was too obvious that Du Guangzhong was trying to brush him off. Feeling the gazes of the three, Du Guangzhong said quickly, "I really didn't say anything. Official Chu just talked to me a little about saber skills." Hearing this, Wu Saiping sneered and said, "I didn't see it before. Old Du, your saber skills are so profound that even the inspector sent by the higher-ups wanted to learn from you. But the key is, do you believe it yourself?" Du Guangzhong was helpless. He said hurriedly, "Listen to my explanation." Wu Saiping waved his hand and interrupted Du Guangzhong. "Old Du, you and I are now in the same boat. No matter what Chu Xiao promised you, it's just an empty promise. Embezzlement is a big crime. It's fine if no one reports it. But once it is reported, we're finished. Chu Xiao can't protect you either. Now I'll give you one last chance. What did Chu Xiao say to you? Or should I say, what did he promise you?" Du Guangzhong looked like he was going crazy. Chu Xiao really didn't say anything to me. He didn't promise me anything. How can I explain it to him? Wu Saiping sneered. Well, Du Guangzhong, I underestimated you. You've decided to surrender to the new lord so quickly. Are you going to help me in my hour of need? Then let's wait and see who will have the last laugh. Finishing his words, Wu Saiping sneered and turned to leave. Lu Qingli and Qin Fang also took a deep look at Du Guangzhong and left. No matter where, traitors were always the most hateful. Obviously, in their eyes, Du Guangzhong was a traitor. Looking at the three of them leaving, Du Guangzhong's heart sank. Things seemed to be getting out of hand. This misunderstanding couldn't be explained clearly. At this time, he suddenly remembered Chu Xiu's previous actions. Chu Xiu had called him over for no reason, but in the end, he didn't say a word and only talked to him about some inexplicable things before letting him leave. Could it be that Chu Xiu did this on purpose? Thinking of this, Du Guangzhong felt a chill in his heart. If this was really the case, Chu Xiu was too terrifying. He didn't say anything and didn't promise anything, but he had already caused a rift between the four of them. Du Guangzhong left in a daze. Now, his mind was full of thoughts about what he should do to explain to Wu Siping and the others. But the problem was that what he said was the truth. Chu Xiu didn't say anything to him at all. If he went back and told Wu Siping and the others that Chu Xiu promised him something to win him over, would they believe him? Just like this, Du Guangzhong struggled for a night and didn't know how to explain. Right now, the four of them were actually in the same boat. There were no benefits between them, but they had their own weaknesses. If they fell out because of this inexplicable reason, the only one who would benefit would be Chu Xiu. The next morning, Du Guangzhong had just come out of his residence when he ran into Chu Xiu. Because of yesterday's incident, Du Guangzhong guessed that he had been schemed against by Chu Xiu, so he didn't have a good attitude towards Chu Xiu. However, Chu Xiu went up to greet him and said, "Constable Du is up early. Come with me to the Guangzhong General Hall today." Du Guangzhong frowned and said, "Why are we going there?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "It doesn't matter what we are going to do. Do you think I will eat you up?" Du Guangzhong was just about to find an excuse to refuse when Chu Xiu said in a low voice, "Don't refuse. Don't forget, I am the patrol inspector now. Can't I ask you to temporarily put down all your subordinates' matters?" Du Guangzhong gritted his teeth and said, "Of course I can." Even if Chu Xiu didn't have any real power as the patrol inspector at the moment, and the few of them were only pretending to obey Chu Xiu and preparing to make him a mere figurehead, he was still the patrol inspector after all. If they really fell out, they would also be punished. Hearing Du Guangzhong's agreement, Chu Xiu asked someone to find 2 fast horses and followed Du Guangzhong to Guangzhong. After they left, Wu Siping's confidant immediately told him the matter. Wu Siping called Lu Qingli and Qin Feng over and sneered. Yesterday, Du Guangzhong just finished a secret talk with Chu Xiu and today he followed Chu Xiu to Guangzhong. If there is no deal between them, who would believe it? Lu Qingli said hesitantly, "Yesterday I thought about it. Old Du shouldn't be an idiot. What is the benefit of him siding with this Chu Xiu? The four of us have something on each other. If he's siding with Chu Xiu, it is equivalent to sending his own weakness to Chu Xiu. At that time, he will naturally be at the mercy of Chu Xiu. Will he do such a thing? So I feel that there should be some misunderstanding. Today, he followed Chu Xiu to Guangzhong. It should be Chu Xiu's order. After all, he is the patrol inspector now. We can't refute things like face." Wu Siping snorted coldly and said, "Whether it is true or false will be seen with one look. I have brothers at the headquarters. I will send a letter to them to help me keep an eye on Chu Xiu and Du Guangzhong. We will see if this is a misunderstanding or if Du Guangzhong really betrayed us." The Guangzhong area was so large. If they relied on sending letters to pass messages, it would be too late when something really happened. Therefore, in the Guangzhong area, each of the Hall of Inspectors had a formation to transmit information to each other. However, the consumption of the formation was a bit high. Other than the important information being transmitted through the formation, the rest of the unimportant information still had to be transmitted through manpower. But now that Wu Siping had decided to make Chu Xiu a figurehead, he naturally didn't have to care about those rules and directly used public tools for private purposes. At this time, after Chu Xiu and Du Guangzhong set off, Du Guangzhong held it in for a long time and finally couldn't help asking Chu Xiu, "You did it on purpose yesterday?" Chu Xiu nodded and said, "Of course it was on purpose." Du Guangzhong was stunned. He didn't think that Chu Xiu would say it so directly without any concealment. Since Chu Xiu had made it clear, Du Guangzhong didn't hide it anymore. He snorted coldly and said, "Official Chu, do you think you can drive a wedge between us with these little tricks?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "But there's already a rift between you guys, isn't there? I know you guys aren't convinced of me. How can an outsider like me sit in this position so easily? If it were me, I wouldn't be convinced either. But it's important to know one's own limitations. Just based on the four of you with your own schemes. Do you think it's possible to make me a figurehead? Du Guangzhong sneered and said, the waters of the Guangzhong torture room are deep. The entire Guangzhong area is filled with martial artists from all over the pugilistic world. The Guangzhong torture room is naturally the same.
In history, there were inspectors who were made a figurehead by their subordinates, and there were even disciplinary officers who were made a figurehead by their subordinates.
There are rules in the Guangzhong torture room.
It's not like other places where you can sit in a high position just because you know how to fight and kill.
Chu Xiu didn't argue. He just smiled and said, all right, we'll wait and see. After a few days, Chu Xiu and Du Guangzhong arrived at Guangzhong City. However, after arriving at Guangzhong City, Chu Xiu just casually strolled around the disciplinary hall before bringing Du Guangzhong to look for Chu Yuanxing. Last time, Chu Yuanxing was chased by people and had yet to recover. During this period of time, he had been resting at home.
Seeing that Chu Xiu had come and had someone to drink with him, Chu Yuanxing was in a good mood.
Brother, did something happen in the territory this time?
Chu Xiu gave some of the gifts he bought to the servants and said with a smile, it's nothing, everything is going well. It's just that I can stand firm in the Guangzhong torture room because of your help, so today I'm here to thank you. By the way, this is my subordinate, Constable Du Guangzhong of the pugilistic world. He also admires you very much. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to find the way, so I brought him here. Du Guangzhong, who was beside Chu Xiu, bowed to Chu Yuanxing with an excited expression and said, greetings, Hero Chu. Chapter 153. In all fairness, Du Guangzhong still respected Chu Yuanxing. However, this respect did not come from Chu Yuanxing, but from Chu Yuanxing's father, Wuxia, Chu Kuanga. When Du Guangzhong first joined the Guangzhong torture room, Chu Kuanga was still in power. Chu Kuanga's charisma was indeed very strong. Even Du Guangzhong, who had never had any contact with Chu Kuanga, respected him. In his heart, the Guangzhong torture room at that time was the Guangzhong torture room at its peak. Now that Chu Kuanga was dead, his legacy had been passed on to Chu Yuanxing. Du Guangzhong still respected him, but not to the same extent as Chu Kuanga. For example, now that Chu Yuanxing asked him to listen to Chu Xiu, Du Guangzhong might agree, but whether he would execute it or not was an unknown. Originally, Chu Yuanxing thought that Chu Xiu had something to ask of him. However, Chu Xiu just had a meal with Du Guangzhong and then left. Even Du Guangzhong did not understand what Chu Xiu meant. However, Chu Xiu knew that what he had done in Guangzhong City with Du Guangzhong would definitely be reported to Wu Saiping. After all, the other party was an old man who had been in the Guangzhong torture room for more than a decade. He definitely had some connections. Chu Xiu was right. After Chu Xiu and Du Guangzhong left Guangzhong City, a middle-aged warrior immediately wrote down what Chu Xiu and Du Guangzhong had done in the city and passed it to the inspector hall. This person used to be like Wu Saiping, a Jianghu bandit. However, Wu Saiping was forced to surrender after being captured by the Guangzhong torture room. He was inspired by Wu Saiping and chose to join the Guangzhong torture room to clear his name, so the two naturally became good friends. His talent and strength were better than Wu Saiping's, so he was directly selected by the sentencing department and joined them. Wu Saiping, on the other hand, started as an ordinary constable. The relationship between the two was not bad. Every time Wu Saiping came to Guangzhong City, the two would meet up. Therefore, he did not refuse the simple task of using his authority to pass on information. He knew about Wu Saiping's situation. His friend was arrogant and ambitious. Even the inspector who had reached the stage of three flower at one's prominence couldn't control him, let alone the inspector who had reached the stage of physical invulnerability. However, he also happened to hear about Chu Xiu from other people's conversations. Although the Longhu list had spread throughout the Jianghu, for warriors like him who were no longer young, they did not pay much attention to it. Moreover, Chu Xiu was not one of the most famous people on the list. Therefore, when he first learned about Chu Xiu's identity, he was also stunned. He did not expect Chu Xiu to have such a strong background. He turned out to be a talent on the Longhu list. No wonder he could become an inspector right after joining the torture hall. Wu Saiping probably did not know about Chu Xiu's identity, so he also wanted to advise Wu Saiping to be careful and not treat Chu Xiu as an ordinary young physical invulnerability martial artist.
Chu Xiao did not get his current position just because of his relationship with Chu Yuanqing. Therefore, he wrote another message and was about to pass it to Wu Saiping. However, he did not expect the formation pattern on the message formation to flicker and suddenly die out. "It's broken?" The warrior frowned, but he was not too worried. He just kept the letter with Chu Xiao's real identity and went out to find a formation master in the Guanzhong torture room to repair it. The message formation was often used, so it was not a big deal. He just needed to find a formation master to repair it. However, the repair time was a little long. A few days was considered fast, and a slow one could even take a month. But it did not matter. Anyway, there was more than one message formation in the Guanzhong torture room. However, he could only use this message formation at will. He could not touch the others. Therefore, this letter could not be sent to Wu Saiping for the time being. At this time, in the Guanxi region, in the inspector hall under the command of Chu Xiao, Wu Saiping received the news from Guanzhong City with a gloomy expression. He found Lu Yuqing and Qin Fang and threw the news in front of them. He snorted and said, "Look, Du Guangzhong has completely surrendered to Chu Xiao. Chu Xiao personally brought him to see Chu Yuanqing. I guess he used this to entice him to stand on Chu Xiao's side." And that idiot actually agreed. Lu Yuqing and Qin Fang also frowned. This time they did not doubt it anymore. They had known Du Guangzhong for more than 10 years. They knew that the person Du Guangzhong admired the most was the former hallmaster of the Guanzhong torture room, giant hero Chu Kuanga. Now, if Chu Xiao used Chu Yuanqing to make Du Guangzhong surrender, it was also very likely. The crux of the problem was, did Du Guangzhong tell them what they had done? Wu Saiping's expression turned cold. "We can't care so much. If that thing is exposed, we'll all be in trouble." "Then what do you want to do?" Lu Qingli asked. Wu Saiping did not answer him. He just said, "Don't forget, we've burned the account books. There's no evidence for that thing." Qin Fang said with a gloomy face, "There's no evidence, but Du Guangzhong is the witness. He knows all the things recorded in the account book. When the time comes, it will be very easy for him to check the records one by one." Warriors had strong spiritual force, so their memory was naturally much better than ordinary people. It was not a problem for them to memorize an account book. In fact, he did the same thing. In order to prevent accidents, he directly memorized the entire account book. Wu Saiping's eyes revealed a trace of killing intent. "The material evidence was burned by us, and the witness was killed by us. Then, won't there be no evidence?" "Wu Saiping, are you crazy?" Lu Qingli and Qin Fang immediately stood up. Their eyes were filled with horror. Wu Saiping's meaning was very clear. He actually wanted to kill Du Guangzhong. There was internal strife in the Guanzhong torture room. There was competition between the 4 disciplinary officers. There were so many inspectors under Wei Jiuduan, so naturally there was competition too. They fought for credit, resources, and so on. But no matter how internal strife, there was a limit. Killing a colleague was a big taboo in Guanzhong. Even if the Guanzhong torture room's Jianghu constables made a mistake, they had to be escorted to the branch hall or the headquarters in Guanzhong City to be convicted before they could be dealt with. They could not simply kill, not to mention killing a colleague without reason. Wu Saiping raised his head and said with a cold expression, "I'm not crazy. This is just the best solution. Don't tell me you don't know how the previous patrol inspector, Fang Zhengyuan, died? It's just killing. What's so great about it? We are all Jianghu constables. Is it difficult to set up a perfect murder scene? You two are too timid to do it. Let me do it. I've long disliked that old man Du Guangzhong." After that, Wu Saiping turned around and left. Lu Qingli and Qin Fang looked at each other helplessly. They couldn't stop Wu Saiping from leaving. In the past, Wu Saiping was a Jianghu bandit. A bandit was not a godly thief. One relied on skills, while the other relied on violence. In the Jianghu, large groups of bandits robbed traveling merchant caravans. A lone bandit like Wu Saiping looked for opportunities to kill and rob. If there was a chance, it was not like he had never done something like exterminating an entire family. Later on, when he was captured by the Guanzhong torture room, his ferocious nature was restrained. But looking at it now, Wu Saiping was still the same Wu Saiping, crazy and ruthless. On the way back, Du Guangzhong felt a little lost. It was not because of Chu Xiao, but because of Chu Yuanqing. When he was young, he saw Chu Kuanga as his idol. He hoped that he could become someone like Chu Kuanga. In his heart, Chu Juxia was a godlike figure. As he grew older, he also knew that in this Jianghu full of interests and killing, it was already a great fortune to have a Chu Kuanga appear. Although this Guanzhong hero, Chu Yuanqing, had inherited Chu Kuanga's legacy, in Du Guangzhong's eyes, he was too ordinary. He was so ordinary that he couldn't even see the shadow of Chu Kuanga in Chu Yuanqing. Chu Xiao said beside him, "Why? Are you disappointed that Chu Yuanqing didn't inherit Chu Juxia's legacy?" Du Guangzhong hurriedly said, "I don't have the right to be disappointed." Chu Xiao said lightly, "It's actually very normal. People are different, even if Chu Yuanqing is Chu Juxia's son. There are many people in this Jianghu who need people like Chu Juxia, but there are even more people who don't want to see another Chu Juxia appear. If Chu Yuanqing was like his father, he wouldn't have lived until now, even with the protection of the Guangzhong torture room." Du Guangzhong was a little emotional, but before he could finish, Chu Xiao said, "Constable Du, in fact, you should be worried about yourself now. Previously, there was only a rift between you and Wu Siping, but now, I'm afraid that it's not just a rift between you. It should be about to break up. I don't know what agreement you have, so I'm also very curious about how Wu Siping will deal with you after you break up." Du Guangzhong's expression suddenly changed. He suddenly said, "What do you mean?" Chu Xiao smiled and said, "Constable Du, think about what you did after you arrived in Guangzhong City." Du Guangzhong was at a loss for a moment. What did he do? He didn't seem to have done anything. Moreover, Chu Xiao didn't try to rope him in or anything along the way. Besides, he had been misunderstood by Wu Siping and the others as being roped in by Chu Xiao. Even if Chu Xiao really tried to rope him in or threaten him, he was prepared to be perfunctory. But the problem was that Chu Xiao also didn't say anything. Seeing Du Guangzhong's expression, Chu Xiao couldn't help but shake his head and said, "Constable Du, you are a little too straightforward, so straightforward that I feel embarrassed to plot against you. You didn't do anything, but in the eyes of Wu Siping and the others, you have done a lot. Once the seeds of suspicion germinate, it will make people think of many things." As soon as Chu Xiao's voice fell, Du Guangzhong's face suddenly turned pale. Du Guangzhong had fallen for the same thing twice. At this time, he wanted to cry but had no tears. Chapter 154. Among the 4 Jianghu arresters, Du Guangzhong was the oldest, but in fact, he was the most honest one. He was not as ambitious as Wu Siping and slippery as Lu Qingli and Qin Fang. That was why Chu Xiao chose him as the target to sow discord among the 4. The first time, what Chu Xiao did only made them quarrel with each other, but they didn't break up. Just like Lu Qingli and Qin Fang, they only suspected Du Guangzhong. But this time, Chu Xiao turned their suspicion into fact. Although Chu Xiao and Du Guangzhong didn't do anything, in other people's eyes, Du Guangzhong had already surrendered to Chu Xiao, and Chu Xiao had already taken out his reward. When Du Guangzhong returned to the inspector hall of Zhenzhou City again, what awaited him was definitely to break up with Wu Siping and the others. Du Guangzhong pointed at Chu Xiao, trembling with anger and speechless. Having been a constable in the pugilistic world for so many years, Du Guangzhong had captured countless villains. His methods were cruel and ruthless, but none of them were as sinister as Chu Xiao, easily playing with people's hearts in the palm of his hand. Of course, it was useless for Du Guangzhong to blame himself for falling in the same place twice. What had already happened. Chu Xiao said lightly, "Wu Siping is an old man in Guangzhong torture room. He must have friends in the headquarters of Guangzhong City's torture room. This matter can't be hidden from others. Maybe Wu Siping has already received the news now, and I'm thinking about how to deal with you. I don't know Wu Siping, but you should know him well after working with him for so many years. How do you think he will deal with you?" Du Guangzhong's face suddenly changed when he heard this. It was because he had worked with Wu Siping for so many years that he knew what kind of person Wu Siping was on Earth. In the inspector hall of Zhenzhou City, most of the low-level arresters had a good impression of Wu Siping. Although he had a strong sense of loyalty in the Jianghu, he was generous and forthright, and was loved by his subordinates. But these were all appearances. Deep down, Wu Siping was still a vicious, crazy, and bloodthirsty bandit. Chu Xiao said in a low voice, So, since Wu Siping and the others think you have surrendered to me, you might as well surrender to me. This isn't a lure or a threat. You have no other choice now. When facing Du Guangzhong, Chu Xiu did not use the great art of extinguishing heaven and earth, extinguishing soul shifting to affect his mind. Firstly, it was because he and Du Guangzhong were both in the physical invulnerability realm. The influence of the art of extinguishing heaven, destroying earth and soul transfer was limited and could only play a supporting role. Moreover, external forces were external forces. Now that he had used the heavens extinguishing earth extinguishing soul shifting technique to affect Du Guangzhong would definitely sense it in the future. If Chu Xiu wanted to use this person, he could not use such a method. Actually, according to Chu Xiu's character, the simplest way would be. Regardless of whether it was the way of the king or the way of the tyrant, the way of killing was always the most energy-efficient way. But this wasn't the Blue Dragon Society, but the Guangzhong torture room. It wasn't that easy to kill people. Moreover, Chu Xiu wanted to control a part of the power of the Guangzhong torture room. If he killed all his subordinates, how could Chu Xiu manage the dozens of cities around Zhenzhou City by himself? So, in dealing with this matter, killing was just a means, not the goal. Du Guangzhong laughed bitterly. Chu Xiu was right. Surrendering to Chu Xiu was his last choice. After Wu Siping and the others received the news, they would definitely break off relations with him. And if he didn't choose to surrender to Chu Xiu, he probably wouldn't have a good ending either. So the best choice was to turn the act into reality and surrender to Chu Xiu. However, Du Guangzhong still smiled bitterly. You can surrender to official Chu, but I only hope to keep my life. Chu Xiu said in astonishment, since you have pledged your allegiance to me, I will naturally protect you. Don't you believe this? Du Guangzhong smiled bitterly. What I did with Wu Siping and the others was too big. I'm afraid you can't accept it, sir. Oh, what did you do? Du Guangzhong seemed to be going all out. He gritted his teeth and said, ever since the previous inspector, Fang Zhengyuan, died, the four of us worked together to keep 40% of the taxes that should have been handed over to the torture chamber. After splitting it evenly, we falsified the accounts. The previous account books have been burned. After saying that, Chu Xiu didn't say anything. He only said plainly, that's all. Du Guangzhong was surprised. Is that not enough? Official Chu, don't you mind? Chu Xiu asked in return, why should I mind? From Chu Xiu's point of view, this kind of thing couldn't be more normal. The previous boss was dead, and the new boss hadn't arrived yet. Wasn't it normal to take advantage of this time to gain some benefits? Seeing Chu Xiu's attitude, Du Guangzhong suddenly realized that he, Wu Siping, and the others had all thought wrong. The previous inspector, Fang Zhengyuan, was upright and even a little stubborn. Therefore, when Fang Zhengyuan was in office, they didn't dare to play these little tricks. Moreover, Chu Xiu was recommended to the Guangzhong torture room through his relationship with Chu Yuanqing, the hero of Guangzhong. Therefore, Du Guangzhong and the others subconsciously thought that Chu Xiu would also be like Fang Zhengyuan. Naturally, they didn't dare to let Chu Xiu have something on them. If they had known that Chu Xiu had such an attitude, cooperation might have been a good choice. However, Du Guangzhong secretly shook his head. If Chu Xiu had the cultivation of the three-flower realm at one's prominence, cooperation would have been possible. However, with Wu Siping's personality, after seeing that Chu Xiu was only in the physical invulnerability realm, cooperation was no longer possible. However, at this time Chu Xiu was interested. He asked, is withholding tax revenue a serious crime? Du Guangzhong smiled bitterly and said, it should be said that it's a capital crime. However, there are still people in the Guangzhong torture room who do this. Why? Du Guangzhong said, because the salary given to us by the higher-ups is too low. Now, the salary of the Guangzhong torture room has not changed for decades. It was set when Chu Kuanga was still here. However, that was then and this is now. When Chu Kuanga was still here, the Guangzhong torture room was not as strong as it is now. For example, at that time, an inspector could be a martial artist in the physical invulnerability realm. But now, one has to be in the three-flower realm at one's prominence. Of course you, official Chu, are an exception. Decades of salary was enough for the cultivation resources of a martial artist in the physical invulnerability realm. But now it was given to experts in the three-flower realm at one's prominence or even the five Qis in the origin realm. Therefore, almost everyone in the Guangzhong torture room salary was on the low side. So some people had the idea of withholding tax revenue. This could be considered an unspoken rule in the Guangzhong torture room, but no one dared to reveal it. There were also some inspectors who had their own sources of income. In any case, they definitely wouldn't starve. It's just that the original Lord Feng of our hall is too stubborn. He doesn't allow this or that. This has led to the strength of our Jianzhou city's hall being the weakest among all the patrol halls in Guangxi. Chu Xiu touched his chin. Sure enough, rumors were just rumors. It was impossible for there to be no conflicts and unspoken rules in a large force like the Guangzhong torture room. As for why Guan Siyu, a hall master who led the Guangzhong torture room to its peak, did not raise the salary of all the martial artists in the Guangzhong torture room, Chu Xiu could guess it with a little thought. It was not because she was stingy, but because this was a rule set by Chu Kuanga. Chu Kuanga's influence on the Guangzhong torture room was too great. So great that Guan Siyu had to worry about her reputation. Such a small matter was definitely different in the eyes of the Guangzhong torture room's own people and outsiders. In the eyes of the Guangzhong torture room's own people, it should be a good thing that their salary had not been increased for decades. Almost no one would object to it. However, in the eyes of outsiders, if Guan Siyu increased the salary of all the martial artists in the Guangzhong torture room, it was somewhat to buy people's hearts. In the past, Chu Juxia relied on his personal charm to build such a solid foundation and influence for the Guangzhong torture room. In the end, Guan Siyu only relied on money to win people's hearts. Moreover, this also gave people a feeling that Guan Siyu hinted that Chu Kuanga was stingy in the past. Gossip was a fearful thing, so this matter had been dragged on until now. Perhaps it would be dragged on until the next hall master, when the Guangzhong torture room had completely erased all traces of Chu Kuanga. Of course, these were not things that Chu Xiu needed to worry about. The inspector hall should have resolved the matter. By the time Chu Xiu and Du Guangzhong returned to the inspector hall, Wu Siping and the other two were already there. Seeing that Chu Xiu and Du Guangzhong had returned, Wu Siping's face did not show any murderous intent. He only chuckled and said, "Sir, you're back? Old Du has been gone for so long. There are many things that need to be dealt with." Chu Xiu said indifferently, "There's no hurry to deal with these matters. It just so happens that I have something to tell you. Follow me to the meeting hall." Wu Siping secretly glanced at the expressionless Du Guangzhong and sneered in his heart. Did this new sir think that he could control them just because he had Du Guangzhong's support? Naive. After entering the meeting hall, everyone took their seats. Chu Xiu said, "Constable Du, close the door." Du Guangzhong obediently closed the door, but Wu Siping and the other two felt that something was wrong. Wu Siping frowned, stood up and said, "Sir, what do you mean by closing the door in broad daylight?" Chu Xiu played with the handle of the red sleeve knife in his hand and said indifferently, "Of course I'm going to say something that can't be known by outsiders. For example, the things that you did after the death of the previous inspector." As soon as he said this, Wu Siping and the other two looked at Du Guangzhong together with a glaring murderous intent in their eyes. This traitor, he actually told this matter to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu pressed his hand down and said, "Why are you so agitated? I didn't say that I was going to report this matter." As soon as he said this, Wu Siping and the others were stunned. Could it be that they had misjudged Chu Xiu's character from the beginning? Chapter 155. The previous inspector, Fang Zhengyuan, had left a deep impression on everyone. In addition, because Chu Xiu was recommended by Chu Yuanxing, Wu Siping and the others, like Du Guangzhong, thought that Chu Xiu was someone like Fang Zhengyuan. However, after hearing Chu Xiu's words, it seemed that they were wrong. Could Chu Xiu tolerate them withholding the taxes? Wu Siping laughed and said, "Why didn't official Chu say so earlier? You made us nervous for such a long time." There was no way to probe this kind of thing, and they didn't dare to do so. If Chu Xiu was really someone like Fang Zhengyuan, wouldn't they be giving themselves away? However, now that Chu Xiu had expressed his attitude, Wu Siping and the other two heaved a sigh of relief. However, at this time, Chu Xiu was staring at Wu Siping, who was laughing loudly. He said calmly, "Is it funny?" Wu Siping stopped smiling and frowned. "Official Chu, what do you mean?" Although Chu Xiu had expressed his attitude just now, Wu Siping still didn't have much respect for Chu Xiu. They were both in the physical invulnerability realm. In his early years, he was also a ferocious solo thief. After being subdued into the Guanzhong torture room, he was also the best Jianghu constable in the Jianzhou Inspector Hall. He didn't think that he was inferior to Chu Xiu. If he had to say that he was inferior, he could only say that he was inferior because of luck. Of course, if Wu Siping received the detailed information about Chu Xiu from his good friend, his attitude would probably change. But it was a pity that it was already too late. Chu Xiu looked at Wu Siping and said coldly, "What do you mean?" "It's simple. I can tolerate you withholding the taxes, but I can't tolerate you being disrespectful to me. This is the Guanzhong torture room, not the Jianghu where you can do whatever you want. After staying in the Guanzhong torture room for so many years, haven't you learned how to respect your superiors?" Before Wu Siping could say anything, the red sleeve knife in Chu Xiu's hand had been unsheathed. In an instant, the blood-refining god gang, which was more than 10 feet long, was slashed out. This knife shone brightly in the conference hall. The ferocious killing intent and evil chi slashed at Wu Siping, which made Lu Qingli and Qin Feng dodge subconsciously. They all looked at Chu Xiu in horror. This was the first time they had seen Chu Xiu make a move, but no one had expected that the young man's strength would actually be to such an extent. They could not recognize such a powerful aura, but they could feel the dense pressure on the blood-refined divine aura. If it was any one of them, it would be extremely strenuous for them to receive the power of the blade. Wu Siping's strength was stronger than the 3 people present. After all, he was a lone thief who could fight against several warriors of the Guanzhong torture room at the same level. In the end, the Guanzhong torture room even sent an expert who had condensed the 3 flowers above the head to capture him. The blood-refined deity shield did indeed make him feel an extremely heavy pressure. However, he immediately extended his hand and an icy blue precious weapon long saber appeared in his hand. The long saber swept out and the sharp edge danced. Saber astral energy gushed out like the wind, colliding head-on with Chu Xiu's blood-refined deity shield, causing a series of explosions. What Wu Siping was good at was also the fast knife technique. It was as fast as the wind, and as explosive as fire. It was a pity that under Chu Xiu's blood-refining god gang, he could no longer display his fast and fierce knife momentum. Chu Xiu's attack this time was to establish his prestige. How could he give Wu Siping a chance? The moment Wu Siping blocked the blood-refining god gang with great difficulty, Chu Xiu's figure had already moved. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Wu Siping. He formed a seal with both hands, and a bright golden gang chi suddenly burst out. Lin character formula. Great Vajra wheel seal. Among the 9 words formulas, Chu Xiu hadn't fully mastered them. However, now Chu Xiu could use 4 or 5 of them skillfully. Among them, the Great Vajra wheel seal, which was the most powerful and explosive, was also often used by Chu Xiu. Now it was close to the point of perfection. The seal that was blooming with golden gang chi suddenly fell. Vajra suppresses the world, slays demons. Chu Xiu didn't have the compassion of the Buddhist sect, but Chu Xiu had some understanding of the fury of the Vajra. In the Buddhist sect's seal, there was actually a tyrannical and destructive aura. With a loud bang, the gang chi exploded. Among the debris were the fragments of weapons. The great Vajra wheel seal that Chu Xiu had used all his strength directly shattered the long knife in Wu Siping's hand. It even sent his whole body flying, and blood immediately spurted out. Chu Xiu took a step forward, and without any hesitation, he sent out another palm strike. The heaven-extinguishing earth-annihilating palm of the great violet sun was unleashed, and the powerful palm force brought with it an incomparably evil demonic flames of the purple sun, smashing into Wu Siping's body. The scorching power caused him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Each of the 3 attacks was extremely fierce and explosive. It was like a crushing force, and it made Chu Xiu look like a god or a demon. It was incomparably terrifying. At this moment, Wu Siping couldn't care less about being shocked. He only wanted to save his life. Taking the great Vajra wheel seal head-on had already injured his internal organs. The purple sun demonic flame of the great purple sun hand was still burning his meridians. If he didn't escape, he would definitely die at the hands of Chu Xiu. Wu Siping formed a seal with both hands and spat out a mouthful of blood essence. His gang chi was released, and it actually fused with the blood to condense a huge knife that was 10 feet long. With a whistling wind, it slashed at Chu Xiu. Splitting wind slash. Wu Saiping's body was the knife, and his gangqi was the sharp edge. He didn't have a knife in his hand, but the power of this slash was even more terrifying than when he held the knife in his hand. After this slash, Wu Saiping's figure didn't stop at all. He directly fled in the direction of the door. The red sleeve knife was held in Chu Xiu's hand. Wisps of black mist wrapped around the knife, and also lingered in Chu Xiu's eyes. A Vici demon knife. Hell's gate opens. With the terrifying hatred and murderous intent of the endless hell, the knife came crashing down. Wu Saiping's seemingly powerful splitting wind slash was extremely fragile and directly smashed into pieces. Just when Wu Saiping felt the evil and terrifying power, but before he could turn his head, the pitch-black gangqi had already slashed across his neck. In an instant, his head was separated from his body, but the strange thing was that there was no blood flowing out of the wound. Dong! With a soft sound, Wu Saiping's head fell to the ground. Instantly, Lu Qingli and Qin Feng's faces turned pale. At this moment, they finally understood why Chu Xiu could become a patrol with the strength of a physical invulnerability expert. Although Chu Yuanqing's recommendation was important, what was more important was that Chu Xiu had the strength to do so. In the Zhenzhou City Patrol Hall, Wu Saiping's strength was almost the strongest, and he was also the one with the most abundant battle experience. However, when facing Chu Xiu, he didn't even have the strength to fight back. More importantly, Chu Xiu's unscrupulous attitude also terrified them. Previously, Wu Saiping had already revealed his killing intent towards Du Guangzhong. However, Wu Saiping had yet to make a move. Even if he were to make a move, he could only scheme in secret and create some accidents. It was impossible for him to be like Chu Xiu, who had slaughtered a constable in the patrol hall like he was slaughtering a chicken. Now that Wu Saiping was dead, what about the two of them? Previously, the two of them were also the ones who disrespected Chu Xiu. Moreover, even if there wasn't such a thing, Chu Xiu would still kill them to keep their mouths shut. Feeling Chu Xiu's gaze, Lu Qingli and Qin Feng suddenly shivered. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu took out an account book and said lightly, "This is the account book of your previous division of loot. You've already burned it." This one was written by Arrestor Du. Lu Qingli and Qin Feng looked at Chu Xiu with puzzlement, not understanding what Chu Xiu meant. As a result, Chu Xiu's gangqi burst out and tore the account book into pieces in a flash. Humans die for wealth, birds die for food. Why do we warriors join the Guangzhong torture room? It's too hypocritical to say that it's to protect the order in Guangzhong and the safety of the people. What we seek are nothing but two things, power and benefits. The salary of the Guangzhong torture room is too little, so we have to find a way ourselves. It's not a shameful thing, but... Chu Xiu's gaze looked straight at the two of them, and his voice was deep as if it directly penetrated into their hearts. But, power and benefits can only be given by me. You can't steal or rob behind my back. Lu Qingli and Qin Feng weren't idiots. As soon as they heard what Chu Xiu said, they immediately understood Chu Xiu's meaning. If they chose to surrender, Chu Xiu could give them power and benefits. Of course, apart from this, they had no other choice. Just look at Wu Saiping, who couldn't be more dead. This was a lesson to be learned from the mistakes of others. So Lu Qingli and Qin Feng directly knelt down on one knee and said in a deep voice, "Greetings, Your Excellency." They were not bowing to Chu Xiu's identity as a patrol envoy, but to Chu Xiu himself. This was also a form of submission. Of course, it was submission under great pressure. Of course, it didn't matter whether they surrendered sincerely or were forced to surrender under threat. Chu Xiu only wanted the result, not the process. Chu Xiu said faintly, "All right, all of you get up. The four of you have secretly withheld 40% of the tax and are still acting so nervous. Isn't this a little too shameful? Don't worry, in the future, you will definitely be able to obtain more than what you have now." Just like what Chu Xiu had said, he had racked his brains to join the Guangzhong Torture Hall not to protect the order of the Guangzhong Torture Hall, but to seek wealth and power. These were the only two things he wanted. With the identity and power of the inspector, if Chu Xiu could only play such a low-level trick like intercepting the tax, he would be too useless. At this time, Du Guangzhong looked at Wu Saiping's corpse on the ground and said, "Your Excellency, how should we deal with Wu Saiping? Killing a colleague is a big taboo in the Guangzhong torture room. Without a proper reason, this matter will be very troublesome." Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, "Reason? People are troublesome when they are alive, but it's much simpler when they are dead. Arrestor Wu Siping was accidentally killed when he was chasing a criminal and died in the line of duty. Is this reason enough? You are all experienced arrestors in Jianghu. It should be very easy for you to fake the scene. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.